If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Frank Miller. I'm a park ranger at Glacier National Park in Montana, and I've been doing this job for 7 years now. Most people hate the winter patrols. It's cold, lonely, and dangerous. But for me, it's when the park feels alive in a different way. The snow blankets everything, turning the world into a quiet, frozen postcard. I've always found peace in that silence. It was January 1963, and the cold was brutal even by Montana standards. The air was so crisp it felt like it could snap if you breathed too hard. The towering pines were heavy with snow, their branches sagging under the weight. I was on patrol near St. Mary Lake, where the ice cracked softly in the distance, almost like music. Elk calls echoed faintly through the valleys, reminding me that I wasn't completely alone out here. I had Rex with me, my German Shepherd. He's not just any dog. He's a former military dog trained to stay calm under pressure. He's been my partner for 4 years now, and I trust him more than anyone else. Rex was trotting ahead of me, his nose buried in the snow as he sniffed, around like he always does. But something felt off that day. Normally, you'd see tracks everywhere: deer, elk, rabbits, but there was nothing. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, but it was completely untouched except for my own footprints and Rex's paw prints. It wasn't normal for this area to be so empty in winter. It's usually teeming with life. I stopped to jot down a note in my logbook. No wildlife tracks spotted, unusual. I was about 15 miles from the nearest outpost, and radio contact was spotty at best in these mountains. I figured maybe the animals were avoiding the storm front that seemed to be rolling in faster than expected. The sky had started to turn gray, and the wind shifted suddenly, carrying a chill that made my skin crawl. As twilight approached, long purple shadows stretched across the snow-covered ground. The temperature dropped sharply. It went from freezing to bone-chilling cold in minutes. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and glanced up at a ridge nearby. That's when I saw it. A lone wolf standing perfectly still, watching me. Its behavior wasn't normal. Wolves don't usually act like that unless they're sick or injured. But this one looked healthy, its fur thick and gray against the snow, and its eyes locked onto mine like it was studying me. Then, without making a sound, it turned and disappeared into the tree line. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as everything went quiet. Not just regular quiet, but an oppressive kind of silence that felt wrong somehow. Even Rex seemed uneasy. His ears were pinned back, and he kept glancing over his shoulder as if he sensed something I couldn't see. I had two options: try to cross Thompson Pass before the storm hit, or head to an emergency cabin about 3 miles east for shelter. Normally, I'd push through. I'm stubborn like that. But something told me I should play it safe this time. As I started toward the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The snow crunched softly under my boots as I made my way toward the emergency cabin. The wind was picking up now, sharp and biting against my face. Rex stayed close by, his usual curiosity replaced by something else, something I hadn't seen in him before. He kept glancing back over, his shoulder, his ears twitching at every little sound. I tried to shake off the unease. "It's just the storm coming in," I muttered to myself, though my voice sounded hollow out here in the middle of nowhere. About a mile into the hike, I came across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. Barefoot human footprints, clear as day, pressed into 2 feet of snow. They were fresh too, not even dusted over by the wind. I stared at them for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Who would be out here barefoot? In this weather? It didn't make any sense. The tracks led straight up a sheer rock face, something no normal person could climb, let alone without shoes. Rex let out a low growl, his body stiffening beside me. My gut told me to keep moving, so I did, but that creeping feeling of being watched only grew stronger with every step. Not long after, I reached a small frozen creek. That's where I found the deer carcass. It was half-eaten, but something about it wasn't right. The flesh looked like it had been burned by frostbite, blackened, and cracked, but the cuts were too clean, almost surgical. The air around it smelled awful, like frozen meat mixed with blood and rust. I gagged and had to turn away for a moment to catch my breath. "What the hell is going on out here?" I whispered under my breath. Rex whimpered softly and pressed against my leg. He wasn't acting like himself at all. This was a dog who'd been trained to stay calm under fire, but now he looked scared. I kept moving, telling myself it was just some predator, a bear or maybe even wolves that had gotten to the deer. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. A little further along the trail, I stumbled upon an abandoned tent. At first glance, it looked like any other backpacker's setup, a small two-person tent with a sleeping bag inside. But when I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The fabric of the tent had been shredded from the inside out, like someone, or something, had clawed its way out in a panic. Outside the tent, the hikers' belongings were arranged in a perfect circle: a flashlight, a canteen, a notebook, and some food wrappers, all laid out as if placed there deliberately. It didn't make any sense. I picked up the notebook and flipped through it quickly. Most of it was just normal stuff, notes about trails and weather, but the last page stopped. "Mikoda, it's watching me. It knows where I am." The handwriting was shaky, almost unreadable. That's when my radio crackled to life. For a second, I felt relief. Maybe one of the other rangers was nearby, but what came through wasn't English. It sounded like another language, something old and guttural that sent chills down my spine. Later, I'd realize it might have been Kootenai, a language spoken by some of the native tribes in this area. But at that moment, all I knew was that it didn't sound right. Then the radio went dead again. The wind howled louder now as the Abide storm rolled in fast and heavy. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Snow swirled around me in thick sheets that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. And then came the sound. It started as a low wail in the distance, not quite human, but not quite animal either, and it echoed through the valley like some kind of horrible song carried on the wind. Rex froze beside me, his tail tucked between his legs as he let out another low growl. I wanted to believe it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. By now, my instincts were screaming at me to get to shelter as fast as possible. But when I turned around to backtrack toward Ranger headquarters, my heart sank. My own tracks were gone, completely erased by fresh snow, and in their place were more barefoot human prints. Circling toward me. The storm was relentless now, the wind howling like a living thing trying to rip through the trees. Snow swirled so thickly around me that it felt like I was walking through a cloud. My flashlight barely cut through the whiteout, and every step felt heavier, like the snow was trying to pull me down. Rex stayed close, his growls low and constant. I'd never seen him like this before. He was always so steady, so fearless. But now he looked terrified. His ears were pinned back and his tail was tucked between his legs. It made my own fear spike even higher. If Rex was scared, I knew. I had every reason to be. I pushed forward, my eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, just for a second, a shape in the distance. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long limbs and something branching out from its head. Antlers? No. They were too big, too twisted. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure stood perfectly still, silhouetted against the snowstorm. It didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me like it was studying me from the shadows. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky despite my best effort to sound calm. No answer. Just the wind screaming through the trees. Then it was gone, vanished into the storm as if it had never been there at all. I wanted to tell myself it was just a trick of the light or my imagination playing games with me in the blizzard. But deep down I knew better. Something was out here with me. I kept moving toward the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. Every few steps I'd catch glimpses of it again, always just on the edge of my vision. Sometimes it looked closer, other times farther away. But it was always there. At one point I heard a voice, soft and faint, but unmistakable. "Daddy." Stopped dead in my tracks. My daughter's voice. Clear as day. "Daddy, help me." My stomach twisted into knots. My daughter was in Seattle with her mom, hundreds of miles away from here. And yet, I could hear her voice calling out to me from somewhere in the storm. "Lily?" I whispered, my throat dry. The voice came again, louder this time. "Daddy, please." It sounded like it was coming from up ahead, from the direction of the emergency cabin. I started walking faster, almost running now, even though every rational part of me knew this couldn't be real. My boots slipped on patches of ice hidden beneath the snow, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting to that cabin and finding her. Rex barked sharply behind me, a warning bark that made me stop in my tracks. That's when I saw it again, closer this time. The figure with antlers stood just off the trail, partially hidden by a cluster of trees. Its skin looked stretched too tightly over its bones, pale and almost translucent in places where frostbite had turned it black and cracked. The antlers branched endlessly into the dark sky above it, twisting and curling like something out of a nightmare. It didn't move, not at first, but its head tilted slightly as if curious about me. Then its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and that horrible wailing sound came again, louder this time and so much worse up close. It wasn't just a sound, it felt like it was inside my head, vibrating through my skull and making my vision blur. I stumbled backward, clutching at my ears even though that did nothing to block out the noise. Rex barked again and lunged forward as if trying to protect me, but he stopped short when the thing finally moved, slowly at first, but with an unnatural grace that sent chills down my spine. Its long fingers stretched out toward us, blackened and frostbitten like its skin. I raised my rifle instinctively and fired a shot straight at its chest. The bullet passed right through it, like shooting smoke, and hit a tree behind it with a dull thud. The creature stopped for a moment as if surprised, then reformed closer to me in an instant. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Grabbing Rex by his collar, I turned and ran as fast as I could through the snow toward the cabin. My lungs burned from the cold air and exertion, but I didn't dare slow down. Behind me, I could hear it following, not running exactly, but moving fast enough that its presence felt like a weight pressing down on me. Every time I glanced back over my shoulder, it was there, closer each time. By the time I reached the cabin door and threw myself inside with Rex at my heels, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely lock the door behind us. For a moment, there was silence except for my ragged breathing and Rex's whimpers as he pressed himself against me. Then came 3 slow knocks on the door. I stood frozen by the door, my breath fogging up in the icy air inside the cabin. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Each one echoed in my chest like a hammer hitting steel. Rex was growling low, his body pressed against my leg. His fur bristled, and his teeth were bared, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't just protecting me, he was terrified. Didn't answer the door. I didn't move. I just stood there staring at it, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. No more knocks. No sound at all except the wind outside and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the door as I moved toward the small wood stove in the corner of the cabin. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the matches to light it. The folklore about Wendigos, the stories I'd heard growing up, said they hated fire. If that thing outside was what I thought it was, fire might be my only chance. The stove flared to life, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little safer. Then I heard it again. My daughter's voice. "Daddy, please, help me." It sounded like it was coming from just outside the cabin now, soft and pleading. I clenched my fists, trying to remind myself that Lily wasn't here. She couldn't be here. But hearing her voice like that, it tore at me in a way nothing else could. "Daddy, it hurts." I swallowed hard and forced myself to look away from the door. "It's not real," I whispered to myself, over and over again like a mantra. It's not real. But then Rex started barking, sharp and frantic. And before I could stop him, he lunged at the door. "Rex, no!" I shouted. But it was too late. The door burst open with a gust of icy wind that snuffed out the stove's flames instantly. Snow swirled into the cabin as Rex charged outside, his bark turning into a furious snarl. I grabbed my rifle and ran after him, my boots slipping on the frozen floor as I stumbled out into the storm. What I saw made my blood run cold. Rex was circling. The creature, the Wendigo, snapping at its legs and dodging its long, claw-like fingers as they swiped at him. The thing moved with an unnatural grace, its antlers twisting upward into the dark sky like branches reaching for something unseen. It wasn't just hunting us. It was playing with us, herding us like prey. Rex lunged again, sinking his teeth into its arm, or what should have been its arm. But instead of flesh or bone, his jaws closed on something that looked like frozen smoke. The Wendigo didn't even flinch. It just turned its head toward me slowly, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. The hunger hit me then, a sudden overwhelming urge to consume something raw and bloody. It wasn't mine, it didn't belong to me, but it felt so real that I staggered backward under its weight. I gritted my teeth and fought against it, raising my rifle again even though I knew bullets wouldn't work. "Come on," I shouted at the creature, trying to draw its attention away from Rex. "Come for me." It tilted its head again, curious, and then lunged forward with terrifying speed. Rex barked one last time before throwing himself between us, his body colliding with the Wendigo's legs as he tried to knock it off balance. "Rex!" I screamed as the creature's claws raked across his side, leaving deep frost-bitten burns on his fur. He yelped in pain but didn't back down. Not until the Wendigo grabbed him by the neck and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. "No," I shouted again, charging forward with everything I had. But before I could reach them, Rex let out one final bark, and then went silent. The creature dropped him into the snow like a broken toy before turning back to me. My vision blurred with rage and grief as I stumbled backward toward the cabin door. My hands fumbled for something, anything that could help me fight back against this thing. That's when I remembered Lily's compass, the one she'd made for me years ago, out of magnetite and alcohol in a jar. It was still in my breast pocket, alcohol burns. I grabbed it and ran inside, tearing through my emergency supplies until I found a flare gun buried at the bottom of my pack. The Wendigo followed me inside. It didn't even hesitate, and for a moment all I could see were those hollow eyes staring down at me as its claws reached out again. But this time I was ready. I smashed Lily's compass against the wall and poured what little alcohol remained onto one of my flares before firing it straight at the creature's chest. The flame erupted like a small explosion in the confined space of the cabin, lighting up every corner with an intense orange glow. The Wendigo screamed, a sound so horrible that it felt like knives slicing through my ears, and stumbled backward into the snowstorm outside. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I slammed the door shut and barricaded it with everything I could find before collapsing onto the floor beside Rex's lifeless body. For a long time after that, there was silence again. Not peaceful silence, just empty silence that felt heavier than anything else in that moment. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, staring at Rex's body. The cabin was freezing, but I couldn't feel the cold anymore. My hands were trembling. My chest felt hollow, and my mind was racing with everything that had just happened. The Wendigo was gone, for now. But I knew it wasn't over. It had left something behind. Something I couldn't explain, but could feel deep inside me. That hunger. It was still there. It wasn't as strong as before, but it was lingering like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every time I looked at Rex, the hunger clawed at me, whispering awful things I didn't want to hear. I forced myself to look away and focus on the cabin door. It was still barricaded, and the storm outside had started to calm down. The wind wasn't screaming anymore. It had softened into a steady howl that sounded almost normal. I thought about Lily, her voice calling out to me in the storm, and felt a lump rise in my throat. Was it really her? Or was it the Wendigo playing tricks on me? I didn't know. Anymore. Everything felt twisted and wrong. Hours passed before I heard voices outside. Real voices this time. Hello? Is anyone in there? I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding as I yanked the barricade away from the door. When I opened, two hikers stood there, their faces pale and covered in frost. They looked terrified but relieved to see me. "We got caught in the storm," one of them said, his voice shaky. "We saw the light from your cabin." I nodded and stepped aside to let them in. They didn't ask about Rex. They probably assumed. He was just sleeping, but they noticed the rifle in my hands and the way my eyes kept darting to the windows. "What happened out here?" one of them asked after a while. I didn't answer. What could I say? That something impossible had hunted me through the snow? That my dog had died protecting me from a creature that shouldn't exist? They wouldn't believe me. And honestly, I wasn't sure I believed it myself anymore. The hunger flared again as we sat there in silence, warming ourselves by the stove. It was stronger now, strong enough that I had to clench my fists to keep from shaking. One of the hikers offered me a granola bar from his pack, but I couldn't eat it. It wasn't what I wanted, and that scared me more than anything else. By morning, the storm had cleared completely, leaving behind a world of untouched snow and bright sunlight. The hikers packed up their gear and prepared to head back down the trail toward safety. Only one of them made it. The other never left the cabin. I don't remember what happened exactly, just flashes of movement and heat and blood. But when it was over, I knew what I'd done, or what it had done through me. The survivor didn't say a word when he left. He just looked at me like he was staring at something monstrous before disappearing into the trees. I stayed behind in that cabin for hours after he left, trying to make sense of what had happened. But there were no answers. Just silence and snow and that awful hunger gnawing at me from deep inside. Years later, people started telling stories about Glacier National Park during winter storms. Hikers claimed they saw a ranger with antlers growing out of his head patrolling the trails during blizzards, always leading them toward danger instead of away from it. Some say he's cursed, trapped between man and monster forever. Others say he's still hunting, still hungry. My name is Howard Pierce. I'm a senior ranger with the U.S. Forest Service, and I've spent the last 30 years patrolling these woods. The Cascade Mountains have been my home for as long as I can remember. It's October 1976, my favorite time of year. The air is cool but not cold, and the trees are alive with color. Reds, oranges, and yellows painting the mountains like a masterpiece. I was out on a 3-day backcountry patrol, something I've done hundreds of times before. My job was simple. Check the trails, make sure everything's in order, and look for any signs of trouble. Fallen trees, damaged paths, or anything that might put hikers at risk. This particular area was remote, though. Maybe 5 people come through here in a month, if that. It's quiet and peaceful, just the way I like it. As I walked along the trail that afternoon, the crunch of leaves under my boots felt comforting. The sound of distant waterfalls feeding into the Columbia River Gorge echoed through the forest. It was one of those moments where everything feels right with the world, just me and nature. But then I noticed something odd. A series of broken tree branches caught my eye, about 9 feet up. They were snapped clean, almost in a pattern, like someone or something had done it on purpose. It wasn't bears. They don't break branches that high up unless they're climbing, and this didn't look like climbing marks. I stood there for a moment, staring at the branches, trying to make sense of it. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky by then, casting long shadows through the trees. The light played tricks on my eyes as it filtered through the canopy above. I shook my head and kept walking, telling myself it was probably just a storm or some natural event. A little while later, I spotted a family of deer crossing my path, up ahead. Normally, deer are calm creatures. They'll freeze or slowly move away when they see a human. But these deer were different. They bolted across the trail like something was chasing them. Their heads were low, their movements frantic. They were running from something in the direction of the North Ridge. I stopped in my tracks and listened carefully. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds chirping, No rustling leaves from squirrels or other small animals. Just silence. And then I noticed something else. Fog was starting to form in patches down in the valleys below me. That didn't make sense either. The skies were clear above. There shouldn't have been any fog at all. The terrain started to get tougher as I moved deeper into the old-growth forest. Thick underbrush and rotting logs made every step harder than the last. The air felt heavier too, like something was pressing down on me, and then it hit me. The rhythm of the forest had changed completely. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it felt watchful. I stopped again and looked around slowly, scanning every tree and shadow for movement. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it yet, and that's how it all began. A simple patrol turning into something I never could have imagined. I should probably tell you a little about myself before I go on. Like I said, my name is Howard Pierce. I'm 58 years old, and I've been working with the Forest Service since I got back from the war. World War II, that is. I was a reconnaissance scout back then, which means I spent a lot of time sneaking through jungles, observing enemy movements and trying to stay alive. That's probably why I feel so at home out here in the wilderness. It's quiet and you can think clearly without all the noise of the world pressing in on you. I've been doing this job for 30 years now, and I know these woods like the back of my hand. Every trail, every ridge, every stream. I've walked them all. But this trip felt different from the start. Maybe it was because retirement is just 6 months away, or maybe it was something else. Either way, there was this nagging feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. My wife Margaret used to say I had a sixth sense about things. She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer took her too soon. We used to hike these trails together before she got sick. She loved the mountains as much as I do. Sometimes when I'm out here alone, I talk to her like she's still with me. It helps me feel less alone, I guess. The younger rangers think it's a little strange, but they don't say anything to my face. I carry a few things with me on every patrol. My leather journal for sketching wildlife and jotting down notes. My father's old Bowie knife. It saved my skin more than once. And a small pack with essentials, water, food, a map, and my radio. That journal has been with me for almost 30 years now. It's full of drawings of birds, deer, bears, you name it. But today, I had a feeling I might be adding something new to its pages. For weeks now, I've been having these strange dreams of something watching me from the tree line. It's not like any animal I've ever seen. It's tall and shadowy, with glowing eyes that seem to follow me wherever I go. At first, I chalked it up to stress or maybe just pre-retirement jitters, but now I'm not so sure. You see, over the years I've heard stories from the local Salish tribes about these woods, about creatures they call the Tall Ones. They say these beings are ancient and powerful, guardians of their territory who don't take kindly to trespassers. Most people dismiss those stories as folklore or campfire tales meant to scare kids. But after what I saw today, the broken branches, the fleeing deer, the unnatural fog, I couldn't help but think about those warnings. As I stood there in the middle of that silent forest, staring at those snapped branches high above me, chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right here. Something was watching me. I tightened the straps on my pack and decided to keep moving. Whatever was out there, if anything, I wasn't going to let it scare me off. This was my park, my territory to protect. If there was trouble brewing in these woods, it was my job to figure out what it was. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this time I'd wandered into someone else's territory. I kept walking, trying to focus on the trail ahead, but the forest felt different. I've spent decades out here, and I know how the woods are supposed to sound. But now, it was dead silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the wind. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. About an hour later, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. There were these strange structures made of woven branches, archways almost like doorways right over the trail. They weren't natural. The branches were bent and twisted together in a way that no storm or animal could have done. And they were too high up for any person to have made them without a ladder. I crouched down and examined one of the arches more closely. The wood looked fresh, like it had been bent into shape recently. There were no tool marks, no signs of human interference. My gut told me to turn around right then and there, but my stubborn side wouldn't let me. I had to know what was going on. The deeper I went into the forest, the stranger things got. At one point, I reached a small clearing and found something that made my stomach churn. A circle of deer carcasses. There were 5 of them, all laid out perfectly, like someone had arranged them on purpose. Their eyes were missing, but other than that, they hadn't been touched by predators or decay. The smell hit me next, a mix of musk and something sweet, but rotten at the same time. I backed away from the clearing, my hand instinctively going to the knife on my belt. My heart was pounding now, but I forced myself to stay calm. Panicking out here could get you killed faster than anything else. Then, I noticed something else. My topographical map was gone from my pack. I always keep it in the same pocket, folded neatly so it's easy to grab when I need it. But when I reached for it, nothing. I couldn't remember taking it out or dropping it along the way. That's when a cold realization hit me. Either I'd lost it without noticing, or someone or something had taken it. I pulled out my radio to call in a report, but all I got was static. No matter how much I fiddled with the dial or adjusted the antenna, there was nothing but white noise. Then, just for a second, I heard something else. A faint knocking sound, like wood hitting wood. It came through the radio loud and clear, before cutting out again. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening for any other sounds, but all I heard was silence. And then, a noise broke through the stillness. A long, low vocalization that started off sounding like an owl but shifted into something almost human-like by the end. My hands started to tremble as I looked around the forest. That's when I saw them, footprints in the dirt near the trail. They were massive, easily 18 inches long, and shaped like a human's, but with deeper impressions where the toes would have been. The strangest part? The tracks appeared and disappeared at random, like whatever made them could walk without leaving a trace whenever it wanted to. The fog that had been forming earlier was getting thicker now, creeping through the trees like it had a mind of its own. It wasn't natural fog. It moved in strange patterns, forming narrow corridors that seemed to guide me toward the northwest ridge. I checked my compass to make sure I was still heading in a straight line, but something wasn't right there either. No matter which direction I turned or how carefully I followed my bearings, I kept ending up at the same landmarks over and over again. An old cedar tree with a split trunk, a moss-covered boulder shaped like a bear's head. I passed them at least 3 times in what should have been a straight path. By now, it was getting late in the afternoon, and darkness wasn't far off. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there before nightfall, but every time I tried to backtrack or find another route down the ridge, that fog seemed to block my way. That's when it hit me. Whatever was out here, it didn't want me to leave. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see a few feet in front of me. Every step felt heavier, like the forest itself was trying to hold me back. My breathing was shallow, and I kept telling myself to stay calm, but deep down I knew something was out there, watching me. Then, through the mist, I saw it. At first it was just a shadow, a massive figure standing between 2 ancient cedar trees. My heart skipped a beat as my eyes tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was tall, easily 9 feet or more, and covered in dark, matted hair. Its shoulders were broad, and its arms hung low, almost reaching its knees. I froze. My instincts told me not to move, not to make a sound. The creature didn't come closer right away. It just stood there staring at me. Its eyes, they were amber-colored and seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. They weren't like any animal's eyes I'd ever seen. They felt intelligent, like they were studying me. I don't know how long we stood there like that, me gripping my knife with sweaty hands and it just watching from the shadows. Then without a sound, it stepped back into the fog and disappeared. I let out a shaky breath and tried to convince myself that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, but as I turned to keep moving, I felt it again. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I wasn't alone. I started walking faster now, my eyes darting around the forest for any sign of movement. That's when I noticed something strange. On the ground ahead of me, an arrangement of stones and sticks laid out in a pattern that looked eerily familiar. It took me a moment to realize what it was, the layout of the ranger station where I worked. My stomach dropped. How could anyone, or anything, know what the station looked like? It was miles away from here, and this pattern wasn't random. It was deliberate. Then I heard it, a voice calling my name. Howard. It sounded like Margaret. My chest tightened as I whipped around, searching for her in the fog, even though I knew it couldn't be her. The voice called again, softer this time, but coming from a different direction. Howard. It wasn't her voice anymore. Not exactly. It was too distorted, too wrong. Whatever was out here was trying to mess with me. I gripped my knife tighter and kept moving, but no matter how far I walked, that voice kept following me, always just out of reach, always shifting locations impossibly fast. And then I saw it again, the creature from before, but this time it wasn't alone. There were more of them now, at least 3 or 4, their massive forms barely visible through the fog. They moved, silently, appearing and disappearing between the trees like ghosts. My hunting rifle suddenly felt useless in my hands. When I tried to raise it and aim at one of the creatures, the firing pin clicked uselessly against an empty chamber, even though I knew for a fact the rifle was loaded before I left camp. A deep growl rumbled through the air, so loud that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. It didn't come from one direction, it came from everywhere at once. The creatures weren't attacking me outright. They didn't need to. They were herding me like prey, using the fog and their impossible speed to block every path except one, toward the northwest ridge. I tried climbing up a steep slope to get some height and maybe spot a way out of this nightmare, but when I reached the top, one of them was already there waiting for me. It hadn't made a sound climbing up, it just appeared. Its face was clearer now in the fading light, broad and flat with deep scars running through its fur like tribal markings. Its hands were massive but human-like, with long fingers gripping what looked like some kind of primitive tool or weapon made of wood and stone. It tilted its head slightly as if curious about me before letting out another low growl that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled back down the slope, nearly twisting my ankle in the process. The forest itself seemed to be working against me. Branches reached down to snag my pack, roots rose up to trip me as I ran. By now, nightfall was creeping in fast, and every instinct in my body told me that if I didn't find a way out soon, I wouldn't make it till morning. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. My legs were burning, and every breath felt heavier, in the damp, foggy air. The creatures weren't chasing me outright. They didn't need to. They were smarter than that. They stayed just out of reach, appearing and disappearing like shadows, using the fog to guide me where they wanted me to go. That's when I saw it, a clearing up ahead, and in the center stood something that made my blood run cold. It was an ancient stone structure, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The stones were arranged in a perfect circle, with strange carvings etched into their surfaces. The symbols looked old, older than anything I could place, and they gave off an uneasy feeling, like they didn't belong in this world. I recognized it immediately from the Salish stories I'd heard over the years. This was one of their sacred sites, a boundary between worlds. The elders used to say these places were dangerous, that they were doorways to something we weren't meant to see. And now I was standing right in the middle of one. The growling started again, low and deep, vibrating through my chest like thunder. I turned slowly and saw them, 5 of them this time, emerging from the fog. They moved with a terrifying grace, their massive forms barely making a sound as they stepped closer. Their amber eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, locked onto me like a predator sizing up its prey. I knew I had to do something fast. My rifle was useless and running wasn't an option anymore. That's when an idea hit me, a desperate, risky idea that might be my only chance. Fire. The forest was damp from the cool October air, but I knew enough about survival to make it work. I dropped my pack and scrambled to gather what dry wood and tinder I could find. twigs, bark, anything that would catch quickly. My hands were shaking as I worked, but I managed to get a small pile together near the base of one of the stone structures. Using my father's Bowie knife and a piece of flint I always carried, I struck sparks onto the tinder until it finally caught. The flames grew slowly at first, but then roared to life as I fed them more wood. The creatures stopped moving for a moment, watching me with what almost looked like curiosity, or maybe anger. The firelight cast long shadows across the clearing, making the carvings on the stone seem alive. For a brief moment I thought it might work, that the fire would keep them at bay long enough for me to figure out an escape. But then something happened that I didn't expect. The fog seemed to react to the fire, swirling around it like it was alive. The flames flickered and dimmed as if the mist was trying to smother them. And then one of the creatures stepped forward, closer than any of them had come before. I gripped my knife tightly as it approached, its massive frame towering over me. Its face was scarred and weathered, almost human in some ways but completely alien in others. It let out a low growl that sent chills down my spine before raising one of its massive hands. I didn't think. I just acted. With everything I had left in me, I lunged forward and drove the knife into its arm. The creature let out a deafening roar that echoed through the forest as it stumbled back into the fog. But my victory was short-lived. The other 4 creatures stepped forward now, their movements faster and more deliberate than before. They surrounded me in seconds, cutting off any chance of escape. My heart pounded as they closed in, their glowing eyes filled with something I couldn't quite understand. Anger? Curiosity? Something worse? I thought it was over, that this was how it would end for me. But instead of attacking, they did something even more terrifying. They didn't kill me. They took me. I don't remember much after they surrounded me. Everything became a blur. The fog, the glowing eyes, the deep growls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It felt like the forest itself was swallowing me whole. The last thing I remember before blacking out was being carried. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could feel their presence. Huge, powerful, and silent. They moved through the woods, with ease like they were part of it, like the trees and fog bent to their will. The terrain didn't match anything I'd ever seen before. It was as if I'd crossed into another world entirely. When I woke up, I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I wasn't anywhere familiar. The air felt different, heavier, colder, and the trees around me were ancient, twisted in ways that didn't look natural. There were no trails, no landmarks I could recognize, just endless wilderness stretching out in every direction. I tried to move, but my leg was injured badly. A sharp pain shot through me every time I tried to stand. My supplies were gone too, my pack, my rifle, even my knife. All I had left was my journal and my metal canteen, which somehow hadn't been taken. I don't know how long I stayed there, hours, days. Time felt strange in that place. The creatures didn't come back right away, but I could feel them watching me from the shadows. Every now and then I'd hear a faint growl or see a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. I knew there was no way anyone would find me out here, not in this place. If I wanted any chance of survival, I had to leave something behind. Something that might help others understand what happened to me. So I did the only thing I could think of. I wrote everything down in my journal. Every detail. The footprints, the fog, the creature's glowing eyes, all of it. I marked down coordinates too, even though they didn't match any map I'd ever seen before. It was like this place existed outside of normal geography. When I finished writing, I sealed the journal inside my metal canteen for protection and hid it under a pile of rocks near a twisted old tree that looked like it had been struck by lightning years ago. I don't know what happened after that. The memories are scattered, flashes of movement, strange sounds echoing through the woods, and those glowing eyes watching me wherever I went. 3 weeks later, search teams found my canteen and journal near that tree, but nothing else. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no trace of where I'd gone. The final entry in my journal described something called Doorways in the Mist. It included coordinates that didn't exist on any map or chart of the region. To this day, no one knows what happened to me, or what's really out there in those mountains. But hikers still report strange things from time to time. Circles of stones arranged like maps of ranger stations, patches of fog that move against the wind, and massive shadows watching them from the tree line. Whatever's out there, it's still waiting. My name is Elijah Thompson. I'm 36 years old, and for the past 3 years I've been working as a ranger in the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. It's a place that feels alive, like it has secrets buried deep in its dark waters and tangled trees. Some people might find it creepy, but for me it's been a kind of escape. After everything that happened back in Detroit, I needed a place like this. A place where I could breathe again. The swamp is beautiful in its own strange way. The cypress trees stretch high into the sky, their branches draped with Spanish moss that sways gently in the breeze. At sunset, the whole place turns into a painting, shades of orange and red reflecting off the still water. It's peaceful, or at least it usually is. That evening in August 1988 started like any other. I was out on patrol, steering my boat through the narrow waterways. The air was thick with humidity, and even though the sun was going down, it felt like the heat was pressing down on me. The sounds of the swamp filled my ears, bullfrogs croaking, crickets chirping, and the occasional splash of something moving in the water. It was comforting in a way, like nature's own symphony. But then I saw something that made me stop. There was a patch of dead vegetation, a perfect circle about 50 feet wide. Nothing grew there. It was just empty. I'd never seen anything like it before. The swamp is wild and unpredictable, sure, but this felt wrong. I jotted it down in my logbook to check out later and kept moving. Night falls fast out here, and before I knew it, everything around me was bathed in deep blues and blacks. Fireflies blinked like tiny stars, and the moonlight reflected off the water, giving everything an eerie glow. I planned to spend the night at Chesser Island Outpost, a small cabin about 20 miles from town. It's isolated, but I didn't mind. I've gotten used to being alone. As I steered my boat toward the island, something strange happened. A great blue heron took off from nearby with a loud squawk. Now, herons are usually calm birds. They don't scare easily. But this one seemed spooked by something. I glanced around but didn't see anything unusual. The air felt heavier than usual that night, hotter, stickier, and there was this faint flicker of heat lightning on the horizon. It wasn't enough to light up the sky, but just enough to make me feel uneasy. The swamp can play tricks on you if you're not careful. The channels grew narrower as I went along, with cypress knees and floating plants scraping against the sides of my boat. It felt like the swamp itself was closing in on me. And then I noticed something else. The fireflies weren't blinking randomly like they usually do. They were flashing in patterns, synchronized patterns. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild after a long day. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. By the time I reached Chesser Island Outpost, full darkness had settled over the swamp. The cabin stood there like a lonely sentinel surrounded by water and trees. As I tied up my boat and stepped onto the porch, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I shook off the thought and went inside to settle in for the night. But even as I tried to relax, that strange feeling stayed with me, like the swamp wasn't just alive, but aware. The night at Chesser Island Outpost started quietly enough. I made myself some coffee, sat on the porch, and listened to the swamp. Normally, this is my favorite part of the job. There's something calming about the sounds of the night. The croaking frogs, the chirping insects, even the distant splash of an alligator moving through the water. But tonight was different. It started with silence. One moment, the swamp was alive with its usual noises, and the next, everything just stopped. No frogs, no crickets, nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the whole place. I've been out here long enough to know that when the swamp goes quiet, it usually means a predator is nearby. But this silence felt deeper, heavier, like even the predators were hiding. I stood up and scanned the darkness around me. My flashlight cut through the trees and water, but there was nothing there. At least nothing I could see. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching. I decided to take a walk around the outpost to clear my head. As I stepped off the porch and onto the muddy ground, my boots sank slightly into the wet earth. That's when I saw them. Claw marks on one of the cypress trees near the waterline. They were deep, like something strong had raked its claws down the bark. But what really got me was how high up they were. Well above my head, too high for any alligator or bear, and there was something else about them. A strange pattern. 6 digits. Whatever made those marks wasn't anything I'd seen before. I took a deep breath and reminded myself not to jump to conclusions. The swamp is full of surprises after all. Maybe it was just some weird anomaly or an animal I didn't recognize. Still, I made a note of it in my logbook and kept walking. As I circled back toward the cabin, a smell hit me, sharp and sour, like rotting vegetation mixed with electricity. It was faint at first, but grew stronger as I got closer to the water's edge. My stomach turned as I breathed it in, and for a moment I thought about heading back inside and calling it a night. But then I saw something else. A small John boat half-submerged near the shore. It looked old and weathered, like it had been abandoned for years. But here's the thing. Someone had taken fishing gear from inside the boat and arranged it on the ground in strange geometric patterns. Circles, triangles, lines crossing over each other perfectly. I crouched down to get a better look but didn't touch anything. My gut told me not to disturb it. Whoever, or whatever, did this wasn't just passing through. As I stood up to leave, my emergency radio crackled to life in my pocket. At first I thought it might be another ranger checking in or maybe static interference from a storm rolling. But then I froze. It wasn't static. It was my voice. The radio was playing back something I'd said earlier that day during patrol, a note about checking vegetation near one of the channels. But here's the thing. I hadn't recorded anything on that frequency. My hands started to shake as I turned off the radio and shoved it back into my pocket. This wasn't normal, not even close. When I got back to the cabin, things only got stranger. The motion-sensitive lights outside kept flickering on and off like something, or someone, was triggering them. But every time I checked through the window or stepped outside with my flashlight, there was nothing there. And then came the voice. At first it was faint, just a whisper carried on the wind. But as I stood there listening, it grew louder until I could make out words. Elijah.
Help me.
It sounded exactly like her, my fiancé's voice. My chest tightened as memories flooded back, her leaving me because she couldn't handle this life, couldn't handle me. But she wasn't here now. She couldn't be here now. I stepped onto the porch and called out into the darkness. Who's there? Show yourself. No response, just silence again. That's when I noticed tracks in the mud near the cabin steps. 3-toed prints that started at the water's edge and ended abruptly halfway up the path as if whatever made them had vanished into thin air. I backed up slowly toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Dense fog began rising from the water in perfect columns, not drifting like normal fog, but standing straight up, like towers reaching for the sky. I locked myself inside and tried to calm down, but every instinct from my years as a cop screamed that something was very wrong here, that this wasn't just nature being weird or my mind playing tricks on me. The swamp felt different tonight, almost alive in a way that sent chills down my spine. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was out there waiting. The motion lights outside kept flickering on and off, and the swamp was still dead silent. Even the usual hum of insects had disappeared. Around midnight, I decided I couldn't just sit there anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, my service pistol, and a flare gun from the emergency kit. If something was out there, I needed to know what it was. Staying inside felt worse than facing whatever was waiting for me. I stepped onto the porch, my flashlight cutting through the thick fog that had settled around the cabin. The air smelled sharp, like ozone mixed with decay, and every breath felt heavy in my chest. My boots squelched in the mud as I made my way toward the dock where my boat was tied up. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow moving, under the water, a long, scaled shape that glided silently beneath the surface. My flashlight caught a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from below. They didn't blink or look away. They just locked onto me like they were studying me. I froze, gripping my pistol tightly in one hand and the flashlight in the other. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The shape moved closer to the dock, rising slightly out of the water. That's when I saw its features, long and lean like a dog but covered in dark scales that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Its face was a strange mix of canine and reptile, with sharp teeth that glinted as it opened its mouth slightly. I took a step back, but before I could react, ripples appeared all around me, multiple ripples. There wasn't just one of them. There were more. They were pacing me, circling like predators closing in on prey. I aimed my pistol at the nearest set of glowing eyes and fired. The shot rang out loud enough to echo across the swamp, but when I looked back at where I'd aimed, nothing. No splash, no movement, just those eyes staring back at me like they knew something I didn't. I test-fired into the ground to make sure my gun wasn't jammed. It worked perfectly, but every time I aimed at those creatures, it misfired or jammed again. My hands shook as I realized these things weren't just animals, they were something else, something smarter. From somewhere deep in the swamp came a sound that made my blood run cold. A howl that started low like a wolf's but twisted into something almost human, like laughter mixed with screaming. I backed up toward the cabin as fast as I could without turning my back on them. The creatures moved impossibly fast, one moment disappearing into the cypress knees and vegetation, only to reappear hundreds of yards away within seconds. As I reached the porch steps, I heard another sound, whistling. It was faint at first but grew louder until I recognized it as my own tune, the same one I'd been whistling earlier to calm myself during patrol. They were mimicking me. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, though deep down, I knew a flimsy wooden door wouldn't stop them if they really wanted to get inside. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my flashlight twice before finally setting it down on the table next to me. Through the window, I saw movement near the dock again, 3 distinct shapes now standing upright on land. Their spines glowed faintly in the darkness like bioluminescent ridges running down their backs. They weren't just circling anymore. They were hurting me. The swamp itself seemed to shift around me as if it were alive. Channels that had been clear earlier were now blocked by fallen trees and sandbars that hadn't been there before. It was like they were controlling everything around me, trapping me here. I tried calling for help on my emergency radio but got nothing but static, and then my own voice again, repeating phrases from earlier patrols like some kind of twisted playback loop. The creatures stayed just outside the cabin, all night, watching, waiting, but never making a move to break in. It was like they wanted me to feel trapped, hunted. By dawn, exhaustion had taken over completely. My body felt heavy from fear and adrenaline wearing off, but my instincts told me not to let my guard down. Not yet. By the time the first light of dawn started creeping over the horizon, I was running on pure adrenaline. My body ached from staying, tense all night, and my mind felt like it was stretched too thin. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in that cabin any longer. Whatever those things were, they had me surrounded, and they weren't going to let me leave without a fight. I needed a plan. The flare gun sat on the table next to me, along with a small can of fuel I'd found in the storage closet. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. If I could create a distraction, maybe set something on fire, I might be able to make it to my boat and escape. It wasn't a great plan, but it was better than sitting here waiting for those things to come for me. Packed what little gear I had into my bag and took one last look out the window. The creatures were still there, 3 of them now standing at the edge of the clearing near the dock. They didn't move like normal animals. They were too still, too deliberate, like they were thinking about their next move. I took a deep breath and stepped outside, keeping my pistol in one hand and the flare gun in the other. The air was thick with that same sour smell as before, rotting vegetation mixed with ozone, and it made my stomach churn. The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet as I made my way toward the dock. Sinkholes had started forming overnight, swallowing chunks of earth and leaving behind pools of murky water. The wooden boardwalk leading to the dock creaked under my weight, and I prayed it wouldn't collapse before I reached the end. That's when they moved. The creatures darted forward with impossible speed, their glowing yellow eyes locked onto me. I fired the flare gun at one of them, aiming for its chest. The flare hit its mark, exploding in a burst of light and fire that sent the creature howling into the water. But there wasn't time to celebrate. The other 2 closed in fast. Their movements almost too quick to track. One of them leaped onto the boardwalk behind me, its claws scraping against the wood as it lunged for my legs. I swung my bag at it as hard as I could, knocking it off balance just long enough for me to keep running. The dock was only a few steps away now, but every step felt like a mile. My old bullet wound flared up with sharp pain, making it harder to move. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I pushed myself forward through sheer willpower. When I finally reached the dock, I saw something that stopped me cold. My personal items, the carved wooden turtle from my grandfather, my logbook, even my spare flashlight, were arranged in a perfect circle on the ground near my boat. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like some kind of ritual or message. I didn't have time to think about what it meant. One of the creatures lunged at me from behind, its claws grazing my arm as I stumbled forward onto the dock. My pistol slipped from my hand and skidded across the wooden planks, leaving me defenseless. Desperate, I grabbed a boat hook lying nearby and lashed out with everything I had. The hook caught one of them in the side, tearing through its scaled flesh with a sickening crunch. It howled in pain but didn't back off. It just got angrier. With no other options left, I pulled out my grandfather's old service knife from my pocket and lashed it to the end of the boat hook with some rope from my bag. It wasn't pretty, but it would have to do. When the creature lunged again, I drove the makeshift harpoon straight into its chest. It let out an ear-piercing scream as its glowing yellow eyes dimmed and its body began to change. Before my eyes, its features shifted, its long snout shortening into a human face, its scaled skin turning pale and soft like flesh. By the time it stopped moving, it looked almost human, except for one thing: a Park Service tattoo on its arm. It was one of us, a ranger who'd gone missing 15 years ago. I didn't have time to process what I'd just seen. The water around me started rising unnaturally fast, flooding over the dock and cutting off any escape route back to land. The remaining creature stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me with those unblinking yellow eyes as if daring me to try escaping. I climbed into my boat and started the engine, praying it wouldn't stall out on me now. As soon as it roared to life, I sped away from Chesser Island as fast as I could, not daring to look back until I was miles away. By the time I reached headquarters, I was barely holding it together. My arm throbbed where the creature had grazed me, and my whole body felt like it had been run through a meat grinder. I stumbled into the ranger station, drenched in swamp water and shaking so hard I could barely speak. The other rangers stared at me like I was crazy when I tried to explain what happened. I told them about the claw marks, the strange fog, the glowing eyes, and the creatures that had hunted me all night. I even described how one of them had turned human as it died, how it had a Park Service tattoo on its arm, but no one believed me. The supervisor chalked it up to exhaustion and infection from my wounds. He said the swamp can play tricks on your mind when you're out there alone for too long. "You've been under a lot of stress," he said. "Probably hallucinations from the pain meds you've been taking." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? There was no body to prove what I'd seen, no evidence of the creatures or their glowing eyes. Even the claw marks on my arm looked more like scratches from a branch than anything else. They patched me up, gave me antibiotics for the bite, and sent me home to rest. But rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes staring back at me, or heard that howl that twisted into human laughter. Weeks passed, but things didn't get better. The bite on my arm healed slower than it should have, leaving behind faint scars that glowed faintly in the dark if you looked closely enough. And sometimes, late at night when I was alone in my cabin, I swore I could hear whistling outside, my own tune being played back to me. 6 months later, fishermen started reporting strange sightings in off-limits areas of the swamp. They talked about a boat moving through the channels at night, always just out of reach of their flashlights. They said whoever was piloting it had glowing yellow eyes that reflected light like an animal's. I stopped going out on patrol after that. The swamp doesn't feel like home anymore, not after what happened. It feels like something else entirely, something alive and angry that doesn't want people poking around where they don't belong. I still carry my grandfather's carved turtle in my pocket, a reminder of who I used to be before all this happened. But now I'm not sure who or what I am anymore. My name is Diane Mercer, and I've spent most of my life exploring caves. There's something about the darkness, the silence, and the endless unknown that draws me in. It feels like stepping into another world, a world where time slows down, and every sound echoes like a whisper from the past. But this story isn't about my love for caves. It's about the one cave I wish I had never entered. It started last summer when I was working at Carlsbad Caverns National Park in New Mexico. I'd been assigned to map out a newly discovered section of the cave system. They were calling it the echo chamber because of how sound carried inside it. Even a single footstep could bounce around for what felt like minutes. It was fascinating, but also strange. Something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Wasn't supposed to go alone, but my partner had called in sick that day. I told myself it would be fine. I'd done solo explorations before. Besides, this wasn't just work for me, it was personal. My twin brother, David, had died in a caving accident 2 years ago. He was obsessed with caves, always talking about how they held secrets no one could explain. He used to say, "There's more to them than rock and dirt, Diane. You just have to listen." I thought he was crazy back then, but now, I wasn't so sure. As I prepared my gear that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that David would have loved this cave, the echo chamber. Maybe that's why I was so determined to explore it. It felt like a way to connect with him again, even if it was just in my own mind. The entrance to the echo chamber was hidden behind a narrow passageway deep inside one of the main caverns. It wasn't easy to get to. Sharp rocks scraped against my arms and legs as I squeezed through the opening. When I finally emerged on the other side, I froze. The chamber was massive, much larger than I'd expected. The walls were smooth and black, almost like glass, and tiny crystals sparkled in the light from my headlamp. But what struck me most was the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was empty. My breathing sounded louder than it should have, and even the faint hum of my equipment felt out of place. I took out my voice recorder and spoke into it. Diane Mercer, entering echo chamber at 9:45 a.m. The area appears stable, no signs of recent rockfalls or structural damage. My voice echoed back at me, softer each time until it faded completely. As I moved deeper into the chamber, I started noticing odd things. The first was a series of markings on the walls, ancient-looking carvings of spirals and stick-like figures with elongated limbs. They didn't look like anything I'd seen before in other caves. The second was a pile of bones near one corner of the chamber, small ones, probably from bats or rodents, but they were arranged in a perfect spiral pattern. Couldn't explain why, but these things made me uneasy. The air felt colder here than in the rest of the cave system, and there was a faint metallic smell that reminded me of blood. Still, I pushed forward. This was what I did, explore the unknown, and I wasn't going to let a little discomfort stop me. But then something happened that made me pause. As I walked along one of the chamber's walls, My voice recorder picked up something strange. At first it sounded like static, but when I played it back, there was something else. A faint whisper beneath my own voice. It said my name. Diane. I replayed the recording several times, holding the device close to my ear. Each time I heard it, my name whispered so softly it was almost drowned out by the static. Diane. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't an echo. It was something else. I told myself it had to be a glitch in the recorder. Maybe the batteries were low, or maybe the strange acoustics of the chamber were messing with the sound. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The whisper felt deliberate, like someone, or something, was calling to me. I shook off the thought and kept moving. The deeper I went into the echo chamber, the more unsettling things became. The air grew colder, and my headlamp seemed dimmer, even though I'd just replaced the batteries that morning. Shadows danced on the walls in ways that didn't make sense, as if they were moving on their own. Then there were the carvings. At first, they were scattered and random. Spirals, stick figures, and strange symbols I couldn't understand. But, as I went further, they became more detailed. One carving showed a group of people standing in a circle around a tall, thin figure with impossibly long arms. Another showed what looked like a cave opening with something crawling out of it. I stopped to take pictures, but my camera wouldn't focus properly. Every shot came out blurry, no matter how steady I held it. Frustrated, I gave up and decided to rely on my notes and memory instead. The path ahead narrowed into a steep descent, a jagged slope of loose rocks leading into darkness. My instincts told me to turn back, but curiosity pushed me forward. I anchored a rope to a sturdy rock formation and carefully made my way down. About halfway down, I noticed something strange. The silence was gone. At first, it was subtle, a faint hum that seemed to come from deep within the cave. But as I descended further, it grew louder, turning into a low vibration that I could feel in my chest. When I reached the bottom of the slope, I found myself in another chamber, smaller than the first, but just as eerie. The walls here weren't smooth like glass. They were rough and covered in scratches. Deep gouges ran in every direction, as if something with claws had been trapped here and tried to escape. I shone my headlamp around the room and froze when I saw what was in the center. Another pile of bones. These weren't small like the ones I'd seen earlier. They were larger, human-sized. My stomach twisted as I realized some of them still had scraps of clothing attached. I backed away slowly, trying to keep calm. It's just an old accident, I whispered to myself. Maybe another explorer got lost here years ago. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Then I heard it again. The whisper. Diane. This time, it wasn't coming from my recorder. It was coming from somewhere in the chamber. I spun around, shining my light in every direction, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was someone else down here? Was this some kind of sick joke? Hello? I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The whisper came again, louder this time. Diane. It sounded so much like David's voice that for a moment I thought it was him, but that was impossible. David was gone. He'd been gone for 2 years. Who's there? I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. Still no answer. Just the sound of my own breathing and that strange hum vibrating through the chamber. And then, footsteps. They were faint at first, but grew louder with each passing second. Slow, deliberate steps echoing off the walls. They weren't coming from any direction I could see. They seemed to be coming from everywhere, at once. Panic set in as I realized how deep into the cave system I'd gone. If something or someone was down here with me, there was no easy way out. I grabbed my rope and started climbing back up the slope as fast as I could. The rocks shifted beneath me, sending small avalanches of gravel tumbling down into the darkness below. My hands shook as I gripped the rope tighter, pulling myself upward inch by inch. But just as I reached the top and scrambled back onto solid ground, I heard one last whisper, this time right behind me. Don't leave. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. But as I hurried back toward the entrance of the echo chamber, something stopped me. The path wasn't the same. I froze, shining my headlamp around. The narrow passage I'd squeezed through earlier was gone. In its place was a solid wall of rock. I ran my hands over it, searching for the opening, but there was nothing, just cold, rough stone. No, I whispered to myself, panic rising in my chest. This isn't happening. I tried to stay calm. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe. The shadows had played tricks on me, and the entrance was just a few feet away. But as I retraced my steps, nothing looked familiar. The chamber seemed different now, larger, darker, and colder than before. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was just another shadow, a faint outline on the far side of the chamber. But as I stared at it, the shape began to move. It was tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes were like mirrors, reflecting the light from my headlamp but showing nothing behind them. It didn't move, like a person. It crawled along the wall like an insect, its limbs bending in unnatural ways. And as it moved closer, I realized something horrifying. It wasn't just crawling. It was emerging from the rock itself, as if the walls were alive and letting it pass through. "Diane," it whispered again, in a voice that sounded so much like David's it made my stomach turn. I stumbled backward, clutching my gear like it could somehow protect me. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. The creature didn't answer. Instead, it tilted its head to one side, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. Then it reached out with one of its skeletal hands and pointed toward the darkness behind me. I didn't wait to see what it wanted. I turned and ran. My boots slipped on the uneven ground as I sprinted through the chamber, desperately searching for a way out. Every path seemed to lead deeper into the cave system, twisting tunnels that felt more like traps than escape routes. My headlamp flickered, again, casting eerie shadows on the walls that made it impossible to tell what was real. The whispers followed me wherever I went, soft at first but growing louder with every step. "Diane, Diane." It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many voices overlapping each other, all calling my name in perfect unison. I stopped when I reached another chamber, a smaller one with jagged walls and a low ceiling that forced me to crouch as I moved inside. My breathing echoed loudly, in the confined space, mixing with the whispers that never seemed to leave me alone. And then, silence. For a moment, everything stopped. The whispers, the vibrations in the air, even my own heartbeat felt frozen in time. The stillness was so complete it made my ears ring. That's when I saw them. Bones, hundreds of them, scattered across the floor like broken pieces of a puzzle. Some were small and animal-like, others were unmistakably human. They were arranged in patterns again, spirals and circles that seemed too deliberate to be natural. In the center of it all was something else, a backpack covered in dust and dirt but still intact enough for me to recognize it instantly. It was David's. My legs gave out beneath me as I stared at it, tears welling up in my eyes. He'd been here. This was where he'd died. But how? This section of the cave wasn't supposed to exist. No map showed anything beyond the echo chamber's entrance. I crawled toward the backpack and opened it with trembling hands. Inside were his notebook and flashlight, both covered in scratches but still functional. The notebook's pages were filled with sketches of carvings and symbols identical to the ones I'd seen on the walls earlier. But there was something else, a single sentence scrawled over and over again in shaky handwriting. "Don't listen to them." Before I could process what that meant, I felt it again, the cold air brushing against my neck like someone standing right behind me. I turned slowly, clutching David's flashlight like a weapon. The creature was there, closer this time, and staring directly at me with those mirror-like eyes. It didn't speak this time. It didn't need to. Its presence said everything. "You don't belong here." I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, and my chest tightened as I stared at the creature. It didn't blink, didn't flinch. It just stood there watching me like it was waiting for something. The silence was so heavy it felt like a weight pressing down on me. I gripped David's flashlight tighter, my fingers trembling. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. It tilted its head again, the movement slow and unnatural, like it was trying to mimic a human gesture but didn't quite understand how. Then it stepped closer, its bony feet crunching over the scattered bones on the floor. The sound made me flinch, but I still couldn't bring myself to run. The closer it got, the more I could see the details of its body. Its skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent, stretched so thin that I could see veins pulsing underneath. Its fingers were long and sharp, almost claw-like, and its chest moved in shallow, jerky breaths that didn't match the rhythm of any living thing I'd ever seen. And then there were its eyes, those mirror-like eyes that seemed to swallow the light from my headlamp and reflect something impossible. When I looked into them, I didn't see myself. I saw others. Faces I didn't recognize, twisted in fear and pain, trapped in endless darkness. I stumbled back a step, my heel catching on one of the bones scattered across the floor. The creature stopped moving and crouched low to the ground, its limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It was faster than me, stronger than me, and I knew if it decided to attack, there was nothing I could do to stop it. But it didn't attack. Instead, it spoke. "Leave," it whispered in a voice that sounded like 100 people speaking at once, low and gravelly but layered with echoes that made my skin crawl. "I can't," I said before I could stop myself. My voice cracked as I tried to explain. "I don't know how to get out." The creature's head tilted again, and for a moment I thought it might help me. But then its body shifted, its limbs stretching even longer as it pressed itself against the wall of the chamber. The rock seemed to ripple under its touch like water disturbed by a stone, and then the whispers started again. They weren't coming from the creature this time. They were coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, even the air around me seemed alive with voices overlapping each other in an endless chorus of words I couldn't understand. They weren't speaking English or any language I recognized, but somehow I knew what they meant. They wanted me to stay. The chamber began to change around me, the walls pulsing like they were alive, closing in tighter and tighter until there was barely enough room for me to stand upright. My headlamp flickered again, casting strange shadows that danced across the carvings on the walls. The spiral seemed to move now, twisting and turning like they were trying to pull me into them. I pressed myself against one of the walls, clutching David's notebook like it was some kind of lifeline. The words he'd written echoed in my mind. Don't listen to them. But how could I not? The whispers were everywhere, inside my head now, and they were growing louder with every passing second. "Diane," one voice called out. The same voice that had been haunting me since I entered this cave. It sounded so much like David that tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "No," I said out loud, shaking my head as if that would make it all go away. "You're not him." The creature moved closer again, its body blending into the shadows until all I could see were those mirror-like eyes staring at me through the darkness. "You're not him," I screamed this time, my voice breaking under the weight of everything around me. The whispers stopped. For one brief moment, everything went silent again. The kind of silence that felt wrong and unnatural, but gave me just enough clarity to think straight. I grabbed David's flashlight and turned it on full beam, aiming it directly at the creature's face. It screeched, a high-pitched sound that made my ears ring, and recoiled back into the shadows. The walls seemed to ripple again as it disappeared into them, leaving behind nothing but cold air and silence. I didn't wait for it to come back. I ran. I didn't care where I was going or what direction I took. I just needed to get away. My boots scraped against the uneven ground, sending rocks tumbling into the darkness behind me. Every breath felt like fire in my chest, but I couldn't stop. not with that thing still somewhere in the shadows. The cave seemed to twist and shift around me as I moved, like it was alive and trying to trap me. Passages that should have led back to the main chamber were gone, replaced by narrow tunnels that forced me to crawl on my hands and knees. The air grew colder with every step, and the metallic smell of blood was stronger now, making my stomach churn. I kept David's flashlight clutched tightly in one hand, using it to light my way as my headlamp flickered on and off. The beam wasn't strong enough to pierce the darkness ahead, but it was better than nothing. It made me feel like I had some control, like I wasn't completely helpless. But then I heard it again. The whispers. They started softly at first, barely, audible over the sound of my own breathing. But as I moved deeper into the cave, they grew louder, closer, until it felt like they were coming from inside my head. "Diane," they called out, overlapping each other in a chorus of voices that sounded both familiar and foreign at the same time. "Stay with us." I shook my head, trying to block them out. "No," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. "You're not real." But they didn't stop. The walls began to pulse again, like they were alive and breathing around me. Shadows danced across the carvings etched into the stone, spirals and figures that seemed to move whenever I looked away. My flashlight flickered now too, casting eerie shapes on the ground that made it impossible to tell what was real. And then I saw it, the creature. It was ahead of me this time, crouched low in the center of a narrow tunnel, its limbs stretched, unnaturally long as it crawled toward me, its mirror-like eyes reflecting the beam of my flashlight but showing nothing behind them. I froze, gripping the flashlight tighter as panic surged through me. There was no way out, no other path to take, and the creature was blocking my only escape. "Diane," it whispered again, its voice layered with echoes that made my skin crawl. I thought about David's notebook, the words he'd written over and over again. Don't listen to them. But how could I not? The whispers were everywhere now, drowning out every rational thought in my mind. The creature moved closer, its skeletal fingers scraping against the walls as it crawled toward me. I stumbled back a step, pressing myself against the cold stone, behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized there was no way I could outrun it, not this time. But then an idea hit me, a desperate plan that might be my only chance. I grabbed my voice recorder from my pocket and turned it on, holding it close to my mouth as I spoke into it. "Diane Mercer, testing sound frequencies." My voice echoed back at me through the chamber, softer each time until it faded completely. The creature stopped moving for a moment, tilting its head like it was listening. That's when I realized something. Sound seemed to affect it. The echoes in this cave weren't just strange, they were part of whatever this thing was. I fumbled with the recorder's settings, adjusting the playback speed until the whispers from earlier played back at double their normal speed. The sound distorted into high-pitched screeches that bounced off the walls in every direction. The creature recoiled instantly, letting out a deafening scream that made my ears ring. Its body twisted violently as it tried to retreat into the shadows, its limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I didn't waste any time. Using David's flashlight to light my way, I ran past the creature and down the tunnel, ahead. The vibrations in the air grew stronger with every step, shaking the ground beneath me like an earthquake. Rocks fell from the ceiling above, crashing onto the floor behind me as I sprinted toward what felt like fresh air, a faint breeze that told me I might be close to an exit. But just as I reached what looked like a narrow opening leading upward, the whispers came back, louder than ever, and with them came a final message: "You can't escape." I turned one last time and saw the creature standing at the far end of the tunnel, its mirror-like eyes fixed on me as its body began to blend into the walls again. It wasn't chasing me anymore. It didn't need to. Somehow I knew this wasn't over. With every ounce of strength left in me, I climbed through the narrow opening and emerged into blinding sunlight. The warmth of daylight hit my face like a wave of relief, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out. I collapsed onto the rocky ground outside the cave, gasping for air. The sunlight felt too bright, too harsh after hours or maybe longer, spent in the suffocating darkness. My body ached all over, my hands were scraped and bloody, and my legs felt like they could give out at any moment. But I was alive. Somehow I had made it out. I turned back to look at the cave entrance. It was just a small opening in the rock face, barely noticeable among the jagged cliffs surrounding it. It looked so ordinary now, so harmless, that I almost doubted everything I'd just been through. Almost. The whispers were gone and the air felt still and quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from deep within the shadows of that cave. I didn't wait to find out. I forced myself to stand and started walking back toward the ranger station. The hike back was grueling. Every step felt heavier than the last, and my mind kept replaying everything I'd seen, the creature, the carvings, David's backpack. My brother had been here. He'd seen what I saw, or maybe worse, and he hadn't made it out. The thought made my chest tighten with guilt and grief. When I finally reached the ranger station, it was late afternoon. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. One of my co-workers, Mike, spotted me as I stumbled toward the building. "Diane!" he called out, rushing over to help me. "What happened? Are you okay?" I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. How could I tell him about what I'd seen without sounding insane? Instead, I just shook my head and muttered something about getting lost in the caves. Mike helped me inside and called for medical assistance. As they cleaned up my cuts and checked me for injuries, I overheard him talking to another ranger. "She must have been down there for hours," he said quietly. "No wonder she's shaken up." Hours. It felt like days had passed since I entered the echo chamber. Time didn't seem to work right in that place. It bent and twisted just like everything else. The next few days were a blur of questions and half-hearted answers. The park officials wanted to know why I'd gone into the echo chamber alone, why my gear was damaged, and why I looked like I'd seen a ghost when they found me. I told them as much as I could without mentioning the creature or the whispers. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But there was one thing I couldn't explain away: David's backpack. When they found it in my gear pile, covered in dust and dirt from the cave, they asked how it got there. All I could say was that it belonged to my brother, that he must have left it behind when he disappeared 2 years ago. They didn't press me further after that. Maybe they thought bringing up David would upset me more than I already was. But what haunted me most wasn't just finding his backpack, it was what wasn't inside it. The notebook. I'd taken it with me when I ran from the creature. I was sure of it. But when I checked my gear later, it was gone. No one else had touched my things since I came out of the cave, which meant only one thing: I must have dropped it. Or worse, something took it back. A week later, life at the park returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after what happened. The echo chamber was sealed off indefinitely due to safety concerns, and no one seemed interested in exploring it further. But even with the entrance blocked off, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lived down there wasn't gone. It was just waiting. One night, about a month after my escape, Mike called me into his office at the station. "You need to see this," he said, his face pale as he pointed to a monitor showing seismic activity from deep within the cave system. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just faint tremors recorded by one of our sensors near the echo chamber. But then Mike turned up the audio feed connected to the monitor. Voices, faint but unmistakable. Hundreds of them overlapping each other in an endless chorus of whispers that sent chills down my spine. "What is that?" Mike asked nervously. Didn't answer him because I already knew what it was. They were still down there, the creature, the whispers. And now they weren't just calling for me anymore. They were calling for anyone who would listen. My name is Malcolm Reed, and I've spent most of my life working as a forest ranger. People say I'm good at my job, but honestly, I took it because I wanted to be alone. The forest doesn't ask questions, it doesn't judge, and it doesn't remind me of the mistakes I've made. It's quiet, peaceful, or at least it used to be. This winter was different. The snow came early and heavy, blanketing everything in white. The roads were nearly impossible to drive on, and the air felt colder than it should. My station was in the middle of nowhere, a small cabin surrounded by miles of trees. It was perfect for someone like me, someone who didn't want to be found. Had been assigned to patrol the area for the next few months, making sure no hikers got lost or injured in the snow. But honestly, no one came out here during winter. It was too dangerous. The silence was comforting at first. Just me, the trees, and the occasional sound of wind brushing through the branches. But then, things started to feel off. It began with small things. The animals weren't behaving normally. I'd see deer standing perfectly still for hours in the same spot, their eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Birds stopped singing altogether. Even the squirrels seemed to avoid certain parts of the forest. One morning, while I was out on patrol, I noticed a set of tracks in the snow. They were huge, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen out here. At first I thought maybe it was a bear, but the shape was wrong. The tracks were long and narrow, almost human-like, but with claw marks at the tips. They led deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and darker. I should have turned back right then. Something in my gut told me to leave it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed the tracks for about half a mile before they suddenly stopped, just vanished into thin air. There wasn't even a sign of whatever made them turning around or walking away. That night I couldn't sleep. The cabin felt colder than usual, even though the fireplace was burning strong. Outside, the wind howled like it was alive, rattling against the windows and doors. I swear I heard something scratching at the walls once or twice, but when I checked outside with my flashlight, there was nothing there. The next day, I found something even stranger. A moose carcass hanging from a tree about 20 feet off the ground. Its body was torn apart like something had ripped into it with claws and teeth. Blood dripped onto the snow below, staining it bright red. I radioed headquarters to report what I'd seen, but all I got back was static, no response at all. My radio had worked fine just a day ago. Now it seemed completely useless. That's when I realized something wasn't right about this place anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was like the forest itself had eyes, staring at me from every shadow and every tree. The air felt heavier, colder, and even the snow seemed quieter, muffling every sound like it didn't want me to hear what was coming. That morning, I decided to check out an old cabin about 2 miles from my station. It was abandoned years ago, but sometimes hikers or hunters used it for shelter when they got caught in bad weather. I thought maybe someone had been there recently and left behind some clues about what was happening. The walk to the cabin was unsettling. The trees looked different, almost twisted, like their branches were reaching for me. I kept hearing faint noises, branches snapping in the distance, soft whispers carried by the wind. But every time I stopped to listen, it went silent again. When I reached the cabin, the door was slightly open. That wasn't unusual. Animals sometimes pushed their way in looking for food or warmth. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The place smelled awful, like rotting meat mixed with something metallic. The walls were scratched, up deep grooves carved into the wood as if something with claws had been here. On the floor there were strange symbols drawn in black ash or charcoal. They didn't look like anything I'd seen before. Circles, jagged lines, and shapes that didn't make sense. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at them. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, like my body knew I shouldn't be here before my mind could catch up. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life. At first, I thought someone from headquarters was finally responding to my earlier call, but the voice wasn't familiar. It sounded distorted, low and broken, like it was coming from underwater. Leave. Now. That's all it said before going silent again. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the room one last time before leaving. As I stepped outside, I noticed something strange in the snow around the cabin, footprints leading away into the forest. They weren't mine. They were too big and spaced too far apart for a human stride. I followed them for a short distance until they disappeared again, just like the tracks I'd seen earlier. But this time, there was something else. A faint sound coming from deeper in the woods. It was hard to describe, almost like a growl, mixed with a low moan. I turned back toward my station as quickly as I could without running. The whole way back I felt like something was behind me, close enough to touch but staying just out of sight. When I finally reached the cabin and locked the door behind me, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just an animal, a wolf or a bear acting strangely because of the harsh winter. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. That night was worse than the one before. The wind didn't howl this time. It whispered. Soft voices seemed to drift through the cracks in the walls, saying things I couldn't quite understand but still made my skin crawl. Around midnight, there was a loud thud against the side of the cabin. My heart jumped into my throat as I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door to look outside. Nothing. But when I turned back toward the cabin, I saw them. Those same symbols from the abandoned cabin scratched into my front door. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside felt like a warning. I sat in the corner of the room with my flashlight and an old hunting knife I'd found in one of the drawers. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little safer. Morning came slowly, but the light didn't bring any comfort. The sky was gray and the snow was falling harder than ever. I decided I needed answers. Whatever was happening out here, it wasn't normal. I spent the morning checking my maps and trying to figure out where to go next. There was an old fire watchtower about 5 miles away, deeper into the forest. It had been abandoned for years, but it was built high off the ground and had a good view of the surrounding area. If something or someone was out there, I thought maybe I could spot it from up there. The hike to the tower was brutal. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and the cold bit through my gloves and jacket like they weren't even there. The forest felt wrong. The trees were too quiet, too still, like they were holding their breath. About halfway there, I saw something moving in the distance, a shadow slipping between the trees. It was fast, almost too fast to follow with my eyes, but I knew it wasn't an animal. It was tall, thin, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. I stopped in my tracks and held my breath, hoping it hadn't seen me. For a moment, everything was silent again, until I heard it. A voice. It sounded like someone calling my name, but it wasn't quite right. It was stretched out and distorted like a recording played at the wrong speed. Ma'al-Kam. I froze. My blood ran cold as I scanned the trees with my flashlight, but nothing was there. The voice came again, closer this time. Ma'al-Kam, help me. It sounded familiar, like someone I knew, but I couldn't place it. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were stuck in place. And then I saw it. Standing, about 20 feet away, was something. It looked almost human at first glance, tall and thin with long arms and legs, but its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, like it hadn't eaten in years. Its eyes were sunken and black, as coal in its mouth. Its mouth was too wide, filled with jagged teeth that looked more like broken glass than anything natural. But what scared me most were its antlers, twisted and gnarled like tree branches growing out of its skull. It didn't move at first. It just stood there staring at me with those hollow eyes. And then it smiled, a slow, unnatural grin that made my stomach turn. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just took over. I turned and bolted through the snow as fast as I could, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that thing. The forest seemed to close in around me as I ran, branches clawing at my face and arms like they were trying to hold me back. The air felt heavier with every step, making it harder to breathe. I didn't stop until I saw the fire watchtower rising above the trees in front of me. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed up to the platform at the top. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost slipped twice before finally pulling myself over the edge. The view from up there should have been beautiful. The snow-covered forest stretching out for miles in every direction. But all I could think about was how far away everything looked. how alone I really was. For a while, nothing happened. The forest below seemed calm again, quiet and still like before, but I knew better now. And then I saw it again. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing around the tower, staring up at me with those empty black eyes. It tilted its head slightly as if studying me before stepping closer. I backed away from the edge of the platform until my back hit the wall behind me. "Stay away," I shouted down at it. Though my voice cracked with fear, it didn't listen. Instead, it began circling the base of the tower slowly, deliberately, as if waiting for something. And then, it spoke. Its voice wasn't distorted this time. It sounded perfectly clear and perfectly human. "You can't hide forever." I couldn't take my eyes off it. The creature stood at the base of the tower, circling slowly, its movements deliberate and unnerving. Its head tilted up toward me, and even from this distance I could feel its gaze, cold and empty, like it was looking straight through me. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. My hands were shaking and my breath came in short, shallow gasps. I kept telling myself this wasn't real, that it had to be some kind of hallucination brought on by the cold or exhaustion. But deep down I knew better. This was real. The creature stopped circling and stood perfectly still at the base of the tower, staring up at me with those hollow black eyes. And then it did something that made my blood run cold. It smiled. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. The sight of it made me feel sick, like my body was rejecting what my eyes were seeing. And then it spoke again, in that same calm, human voice. "Come down." I shook my head violently, gripping the railing of the platform so hard that my knuckles turned white. "No," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the sound of the wind. The creature tilted its head again, as if amused by my defiance. "You can't stay up there forever," it said. "You'll have to come down eventually." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. The tower was high enough to keep me safe for now, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. The cold was already seeping into my bones, and I hadn't brought any supplies with me. No food, no water. Nothing to keep me warm if the temperature dropped any further. The creature began to move again, this time pacing back and forth at the edge of the clearing like a predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. It didn't seem in any hurry. It knew time was on its side. I forced myself to think logically. What did I know about this thing? Not much. Just that it wasn't human and that it seemed to enjoy playing with me. But there had to be a way out of this. There always was. I remembered something an old hunter had told me years ago when I first started working as a ranger. "The forest has rules," he'd said. "If you respect them, you'll be fine. But if you break them, well, let's just say the forest doesn't forgive easily." At the time, I'd dismissed his words as nothing more than superstition, stories meant to scare rookies like me into taking their jobs seriously. But now I wasn't so sure. What if this thing was part of those rules? What if it was some kind of punishment for something I'd done or failed to do? I racked my brain trying to remember anything that might help me understand what I was dealing with, and then it hit me. The symbols, the strange markings I'd seen in the abandoned cabin and on the door of my station, they had to mean something. They weren't random, they were deliberate. But what did they mean? The creature's voice broke through my thoughts. "You're wasting time," it said, its tone almost mocking now. "You can't hide from me." I ignored it and focused on the symbols instead, trying to picture them in my mind's eye. They'd been drawn in black ash or charcoal, circles, jagged lines, shapes that didn't make sense. Wait, one of the symbols had looked familiar, not because I'd seen it before, but because it reminded me of something else. A trap. That's when everything clicked into place. This thing wasn't just hunting me, it was trapping me. The symbols weren't warnings, they were lures. It wanted me here. The realization sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through me, but it also gave me a spark of hope. If this thing had gone through so much trouble to lure me here, maybe there was a way to turn its own trap against it. I took a deep breath and forced myself to think clearly despite the fear clawing at my mind. The creature wanted me to come down. From the tower, that much was obvious, but why? If it could climb up here or knock the tower down, it would have done so already. That meant it needed me on the ground for some reason. Maybe that gave me an advantage. I scanned the platform for anything I could use as a weapon or distraction, but found nothing except an old metal toolbox bolted to one corner of the floorboards. Inside were a few rusty tools, a hammer, some nails, and a flare gun with one flare left in its chamber. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I grabbed the flare gun and stuffed the hammer into my jacket pocket before stepping back toward the edge of the platform. The creature stopped pacing when it saw me move closer. "Good," it said softly, the word dripping with satisfaction, like honey from a spoon. I raised the flare gun slowly until it was pointed directly at its chest. Its smile faltered for just a moment before returning wider than ever, as if daring me to pull the trigger. "You think that will stop me?" It laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. But there was something else beneath its confidence. Something almost like doubt or fear. Without another word or hesitation, I fired. The flare shot out of the gun with a loud pop, streaking through the air like a fiery comet. It hit the creature square in the chest, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The thing let out an ear-piercing scream, a sound so unnatural it made my ears ring and my stomach churn. Its body jerked and twisted violently as the flare burned into its pale skin, lighting up the clearing like a bonfire. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I scrambled down the ladder as fast as I could, my hands slipping on the cold metal rungs. The creature was thrashing wildly, its movements erratic and frantic, but I knew it wouldn't stay down for long. I hit the ground running, heading back toward my station as fast as my legs could carry me. The snow was deep, slowing me down, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Behind me, I could hear the creature's screams fading into the distance, but I didn't dare look back. The forest seemed darker now, even though it was still daytime. The trees loomed over me like silent witnesses to everything that had happened, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Every shadow felt alive, every sound made me jump, but I kept moving. When I finally reached my cabin, I slammed. The door shut and locked it, though I knew it wouldn't do much if the creature decided to come after me again. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the flare gun on the floor before collapsing into a chair by the fireplace. For a while, I just sat there staring at the flames as they crackled and danced in the hearth. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. What was that thing? Why had it come after me? And most importantly, was it gone? I didn't have answers to any of those questions. Hours passed before I finally felt safe enough to move again. The forest outside was quiet now, too quiet, but at least there were no signs of the creature. I tried using my radio again to call for help, but all I got was static. My phone was dead too. The cold must have drained its battery. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. The cabin felt like a trap now, a prison, and every creak of the floorboards made me jump. The next morning I packed what little supplies I had left and started making my way back toward civilization. The hike was long and grueling, but eventually I reached a small ranger station near the edge of the forest. When I told them what had happened, they didn't believe me. "Hypothermia can cause hallucinations," one of them said kindly but firmly. "You were probably just seeing things." They chalked it up to exhaustion and exposure to the cold, and maybe they were right. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me out there in the snow. But deep down, I knew better. That thing was real, and it wasn't gone. For weeks after returning home, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face. Those hollow black eyes staring at me. That twisted smile full of jagged teeth. I started researching everything I could about creatures like it. Legends, folklore, anything that might explain what I'd seen. That's when I came across stories about something called a Wendigo, a spirit of hunger and greed that haunts forests during harsh winters. The descriptions matched perfectly, tall and thin with pale skin stretched over its bones, antlers growing from its head, a voice that mimics human speech to lure its victims closer. But what scared me most was what came next. Wendigos don't die easily, and they always come back. It's been months now since that night in the forest, but every time winter rolls around again and the snow starts falling, I can't help but feel like it's watching me, waiting. My name is Eleanor Parker, and I've spent most of my life exploring caves. There's something about the darkness, the silence, and the endless tunnels that feels like home to me. Maybe it's because I've always felt a little lost in the outside world. But here, underground, I feel like I belong. I work as a ranger at Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. It's one of the largest cave systems in the world, stretching for miles and miles beneath the earth. Most people come here to see the guided tours, the safe parts of the caves where everything is well lit and mapped out. But my job is different. I explore the parts no one has ever seen before, charting new tunnels and studying the strange formations hidden deep inside. It was a quiet morning when it all started. The air was crisp, and the sun hadn't fully risen yet. I was sitting in my small office at the park, sipping coffee and reviewing some seismic readings from the past week. Something wasn't right. The data showed unusual activity in one of the unexplored sections of the cave system, a place we called Sector 13. It wasn't just normal vibrations from shifting rocks or underground water flow. These readings were erratic, almost like something was moving down there. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I'd seen strange things in caves before, rare minerals, fossils that didn't make sense, even pockets of air so still they felt unnatural. But this was different. Eleanor, my colleague Mark called from across the room. You heading out today? Yeah, I replied, grabbing my gear bag. Sector 13 looks like it needs another look. Mark raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? That place gives me the creeps. I laughed it off. You say that about every cave. But truth be told, Sector 13 had always felt off to me, too. The last time I'd been down there, my flashlight flickered even though its batteries were brand new. My radio had cut out completely, leaving me in total silence for hours until I climbed back up to higher ground. Still, I couldn't resist going back. Something about those seismic readings pulled at me, like they were calling my name. By noon, I was geared up and ready to go. Helmet, flashlight, rope, climbing tools. It was all second nature to me by now. As I descended into Sector 13, the familiar damp smell of earth surrounded me. The walls of the cave glistened with moisture, and tiny droplets fell from stalactites above. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. At first, there were faint sounds, water dripping somewhere far away, the rustle of bats overhead. But soon, even those disappeared. It was as if the cave swallowed every noise whole. I reached a narrow passage that led into Sector 13 and squeezed through carefully. The tunnel opened up into a massive chamber, a space so large it felt like standing inside a cathedral made of stone. My flashlight beam danced across jagged rock formations and pools of water that shimmered like glass. And then I saw it. Something strange on the ground near one of the pools. At first, I thought it was just a rock or debris left behind by previous explorers. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't natural at all. It looked like a fossil, a twisted shape frozen in stone, but not like any fossil I'd ever seen before. It was long and thin, almost snake-like, but with what looked like small arms branching out from its sides. The surface was smooth and glossy, reflecting my flashlight like polished metal. "What are you?" I whispered to myself. I crouched down to take a closer look, but didn't touch it. Something about it made my skin crawl, like it wasn't meant to be here. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life with static. "Eleanor?" Mark's voice came through faintly. I grabbed my radio and pressed the button to respond. "I'm here." But Before he could say anything else, the static grew louder and then stopped altogether. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I thought about turning back. Maybe Mark had been right. Maybe this place really did have something wrong with it. But curiosity got the better of me. It always does. I stood up and shone my flashlight deeper into the chamber ahead. The light barely reached the far walls. It felt like they stretched on forever. As I took a step forward, something caught my ear. A faint sound coming from somewhere deep within Sector 13. It wasn't water dripping or rocks shifting this time. It sounded like whispering. I froze in place, my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. Whispering. Underground? I told myself it had to be the wind, air moving through unseen cracks and tunnels. Caves can play tricks on you. The acoustics make sounds bounce around in ways that don't make sense, but still, this didn't feel like the wind. The whispers were faint, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I couldn't make out any words, but the rhythm sounded familiar, almost comforting. It reminded me of my sister Maria's voice. Maria. Just thinking about her made my chest tighten. She had passed away 5 years ago in a car accident. We were twins, and losing her felt like losing half of myself. Since then, I'd thrown myself into my work, spending more time underground than above it. The caves became my escape, a place where I didn't have to think about the empty space she left behind. I reached into my pocket and touched the rosary she used to carry everywhere. It was old and worn, the beads smooth from years of use. She had given it to me just days before the accident, saying, "You'll need this more than I will." At the time, I thought she was joking. Now it felt like the only piece of her I had left. The whispers grew quieter, fading into the background noise of the cave. I shook off the uneasy feeling and focused on the task at hand. Sector 13 wasn't going to map itself. As I moved deeper into the cave system, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't just the whispers, it was something else. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. My flashlight beam seemed dimmer than usual, barely cutting through the darkness ahead. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my surroundings. The walls here were different from other parts of Mammoth Cave. Smoother, almost polished in some places. Strange mineral deposits glinted like tiny stars when my light hit them. Then I noticed something odd. Small scratches on the walls of the tunnel. They looked deliberate, like someone, or something, had been clawing at the rock. The marks were uneven but deep enough to make me wonder what could have caused them. Probably just animals, I muttered to myself, though even as I said it, I didn't believe it. I kept moving forward until I reached another large chamber. This one was smaller than the first, but still impressive, with stalagmites rising from the floor like jagged teeth. In the center of the room was a pool of water so still it looked like a sheet of glass. I crouched down to examine it more closely. The water was crystal clear, reflecting every detail of the cave ceiling above. But as I stared into it, something strange happened. The reflection shifted. At first, I thought it was just my flashlight creating shadows on the surface. But then I saw it, a figure standing behind me in the reflection. My heart jumped into my throat as I spun around, but there was no one there. The chamber was empty. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. "You're imagining things," I said out loud, though my voice sounded shaky even to me. Still, I couldn't ignore what I'd seen in that reflection. A figure that looked eerily familiar. It had Maria's silhouette, her height, her posture, even her long braid that she always wore over her shoulder. I reached for my radio again and pressed the button. "Mark, are you there?" Static crackled in response, but no voice came through. "Mark?" I tried again. Nothing. I stared at the radio for a moment before clipping it back onto my belt. If Mark couldn't hear me, there wasn't much he could do to help anyway. I decided to keep going, not because I wasn't scared, but because turning back felt wrong somehow. Like if I left now, I'd regret it forever. The next tunnel was narrow and winding, forcing me to crouch as I moved through it. My knees scraped against sharp rocks, and my flashlight flickered again despite being fully charged when I started this morning. Every few minutes, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, soft and slow, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Get a grip, I whispered to myself. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. This wasn't just paranoia or nerves. It felt real. As I reached another small chamber at the end of the tunnel, the whispers returned, louder this time and unmistakably clear. Eleanor. It was my name, and it sounded exactly like Maria's voice. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The voice, Maria's voice, echoed softly through the chamber. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to send a chill down my spine. Eleanor, it came again, faint but unmistakable. My flashlight shook in my hands as I swung it around, scanning the walls and corners of the chamber. Nothing. The room was empty except for me. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the cave was playing tricks on me again, twisting sounds into something familiar. But deep down, I knew better. That voice wasn't random. It had called my name. Maria, I whispered into the darkness. Silence, waited for a response, but none came. The air felt heavier now, like the cave itself was holding its breath. I touched the rosary in my pocket again, gripping it tightly as I tried to steady myself. You're imagining things, I muttered under my breath. Focus. I forced myself to move forward, deeper into the cave system. The tunnel ahead was narrow and uneven, forcing me to crouch as I navigated through it. My flashlight flickered again, a quick pulse of light that made my heart race. But it stayed on. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. The walls were covered in more scratches, long, jagged marks that looked too deliberate to be natural. They crisscrossed over each other in chaotic patterns, some fresh and others worn smooth by time. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were leading me somewhere. Then I noticed something else. The temperature was dropping. It had been cool when I first entered Sector 13, but now it was downright cold. My breath fogged up in front of me as I exhaled, and goosebumps prickled along my arms despite the layers of clothing I wore. I reached another chamber, a smaller one this time, and stopped in my tracks. There was something on the ground. At first glance, it looked like a pile of rocks or debris scattered across the floor. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't rocks at all, it was bones. Human bones. I stared at them, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. There were fragments everywhere. A skull half buried in dirt, ribs twisted at unnatural angles and smaller bones scattered like someone had thrown them here carelessly. My stomach turned as I knelt down to inspect them more closely. They weren't ancient. They hadn't been here for hundreds of years like some fossils we'd found in other parts of Mammoth Cave. These were recent. The edges were clean and sharp, not worn down by time or erosion, whoever this person was. They hadn't been dead for long. I grabbed my radio again and pressed the button with trembling fingers. Mark, are you there? This is urgent. Static crackled in response, followed by faint whispers that made my skin crawl. Mark? I tried. Again, nothing. I clipped the radio back onto my belt and stood up quickly, scanning the chamber with my flashlight. The beam caught something shiny near one of the walls, a metal object half buried in dirt. I walked over and crouched down to pick it up. It was a watch, its face cracked but still ticking faintly. The leather strap was worn and stained with what looked like dried blood. My heart sank as I turned it over in my hands. There was an engraving on the back. To Dad. Love always. Whoever had been wearing this, they hadn't made it out alive. The whispers returned as I stood, there holding the watch, soft at first but growing louder with each passing second. They seemed to come from every direction now, bouncing off the walls and filling the chamber with an eerie hum. Eleanor. This time, the voice sounded closer, like someone standing just behind me. I spun around quickly, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but again there was no one there. Stop it, I shouted into the void, my voice echoing back at me like a taunt. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving behind an unsettling silence that felt worse than the noise itself. I didn't want to stay here any longer. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to get out while I still could. But something kept pulling me forward. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something stronger, something I couldn't explain. As I moved deeper into Sector 13, the tunnels grew narrower and more twisted. The scratches on the walls became more frequent and erratic, like whatever had made them was growing desperate or angry. Then came another sound, different from before. It wasn't whispers this time. It was breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. Echoed through the tunnel ahead of me. A sound so raw and primal that it made every hair on my body stand on end. It wasn't human. It couldn't be human. I stopped in my tracks and held my breath, listening carefully. The sound grew louder with each passing second until it felt like whatever was making it was right around the corner. My flashlight flickered, again, once, twice, then went out completely. No, I whispered desperately as I smacked it against my palm, trying to get it to turn back on. Not now. The breathing grew louder still, closer now, and I fumbled for my backup light, in my gear bag with shaking hands. Just as I clicked it on, a shadow moved across the tunnel ahead of me, a shape so fast and fleeting that I couldn't make out what it was. But whatever it wasn't alone. I shone my flashlight ahead cautiously, sweeping it across every inch of the tunnel walls and floor, but there was nothing there anymore, just empty space and silence once again. But then came another sound, a low growl that rumbled through the tunnel like thunder underground. And this time there was no mistaking it. I wasn't alone anymore. The growl echoed through the tunnel, low and guttural, sending a shiver down my spine. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I aimed it toward the sound. The beam of light seemed so small, so useless against the vast darkness that surrounded me. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. Was it an animal? A bear? No, bears didn't come this deep into caves. Maybe it was a mountain lion, but even that didn't feel right. Whatever was making that sound, it wasn't natural. The growl came again, louder this time, and closer. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a flicker of movement at the edge of my flashlight's beam. But as it stepped into the light, I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The creature was hunched over, its body unnaturally long and thin. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, almost translucent in places. Its arms were too long for its body, ending in sharp claws that scraped against the rocky ground as it moved. But it was its face that terrified me the most. Sunken eyes that glowed faintly in the dark and a mouth filled with jagged teeth that seemed too large for its skull. It stared at me for a moment, tilting its head like it was studying me. Its breathing was loud and ragged, each exhale sounding like a hiss. I took a step back, my boots crunching against the loose rocks on the floor. The sound seemed to snap the creature out of its trance. It let out a screech, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the tunnel and lunged toward me. I turned and ran. The tunnel was narrow and uneven, making it hard to move quickly without tripping over rocks or scraping against the walls. My flashlight bounced wildly in my hand as I sprinted forward, casting erratic shadows on the walls around me. Behind me, I could hear the creature's claws scraping against the ground as it chased after me. Its screeches grew louder and more frantic with each passing second. "Don't look back," I told myself through gritted teeth. "Just keep moving." But no matter how fast I ran, the sound of its pursuit never faded. It was getting closer. Reached another chamber, a larger one this time, and skidded to a stop. My heart sank as I realized there were 3 tunnels branching off from here, and I had no idea which one would lead me back to safety. The creature's screeches echoed behind me, growing louder by the second. I didn't have time to think. I just picked a tunnel at random and ran. This one was even narrower than before, forcing me to crouch as I moved through it. The walls pressed in on either side of me, making it hard to breathe. My flashlight flickered again. Once. Twice. Then went out completely. "No," I whispered desperately as I smacked it against my palm. "Not now." The darkness closed, in around me like a living thing, thick and suffocating. I fumbled for my backup light in my gear bag with shaking hands, but dropped it in my panic. "Come on," I muttered under my breath as I searched blindly on the ground for the light. That's when I heard it, the sound of claws scraping against rock just behind me. I grabbed a rock from the ground and swung blindly behind me. It connected with something solid, and there was a sharp screech of pain followed by a loud thud as the creature fell back. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, I scrambled forward on all fours until I felt open space ahead of me. My hands found another chamber, this one smaller but with higher ceilings, and I pulled myself inside just as the creature let out another ear-piercing wail behind me. I pressed myself against the far wall of the chamber, clutching the rosary in, my pocket like a lifeline. My breathing was ragged, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that it drowned out everything else. For a moment there was silence. Then came another sound, different this time. It wasn't screeches or growls. It was whispering again. Eleanor. Maria's voice echoed softly through the chamber, clear and unmistakable. "Eleanor, help me." Tears welled up in my eyes as I clutched the rosary tighter. "Maria," I whispered into the darkness. The whispers grew louder now, filling every corner of the chamber until they were deafening. "Eleanor, don't leave me." I shook my head violently, trying to block out the sound. "You're not real," I said through gritted teeth. "You're not real." But deep down, part of me wanted to believe it was her, that somehow she was still here with me in this awful place. The whispers stopped abruptly as another noise filled the chamber, a low rumble that shook the ground beneath me. At first, I thought it was an earthquake or a cave-in, but then I realized it wasn't coming from above or below. It was coming from inside the walls themselves. The creature's screeches returned suddenly as it burst into the chamber from one of the tunnels behind me. But this time it wasn't alone. There were more of them now, at least 3 or 4, all identical to the first one but moving with terrifying speed and coordination. They surrounded me quickly, cutting off any chance of escape. I backed up against the wall again, gripping my climbing axe tightly in one hand while clutching Maria's rosary in the other. "Stay back," I shouted at them, though my voice cracked with fear. The creatures didn't respond. They just stared at me with those glowing eyes and opened their mouths wide to reveal rows upon rows of jagged teeth. One of them lunged toward me, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold, damp floor of the chamber. My head throbbed and my hands felt numb. The creatures were gone, or at least I thought they were. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the faint sound of water dripping somewhere far away. I sat up slowly, my body aching from the fall. My flashlight was still in my hand, but it wasn't working anymore. I fumbled for my backup light and found it lying nearby. With trembling fingers, I switched it on, and the dim beam illuminated the chamber around me. The walls were covered in scratches, hundreds of them, overlapping and crisscrossing in chaotic patterns. But now, I could see something else. Symbols carved into the rock. They weren't random. They looked deliberate, like someone, or something, had been trying to communicate. I didn't recognize the symbols, but they made my skin crawl. They were jagged and uneven, almost like they'd been carved in a frenzy. Some of them looked like eyes, others like mouths with sharp teeth. I stood up slowly, gripping the rosary in my pocket for comfort. "You have to get out of here," I told myself. "Now." I started moving toward one of the tunnels that led out of the chamber, but as soon as I stepped inside, the whispers returned. "Eleanor." Maria's voice echoed softly through the tunnel, clear and unmistakable. "Eleanor, don't leave me." I stopped in my tracks, tears stinging my eyes. "Maria," I whispered into the darkness. The whispers grew louder now, filling every corner of the tunnel until they were deafening. Eleanor, help me. I shook my head violently, trying to block out the sound. You're not real, I said through gritted teeth. You're not real, but part of me couldn't let go of her voice. What if she was real? What if she was trapped down here somehow? Against every instinct telling me to leave, I turned back toward the chamber and followed the sound of her voice. The tunnel twisted and turned as I moved deeper into Sector 13. The air grew colder with every step, and my breath fogged up in front of me. My flashlight flickered again, once, twice, then stayed on. The whispers guided me forward, growing louder and more urgent with each passing second. Eleanor, hurry. I reached another chamber, a massive one this time, and stopped in my tracks. In the center of the room was a figure, a woman standing perfectly still with her back to me. Her long braid draped over her shoulder just like Maria's used to. Maria, I whispered. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Maria. She turned slowly to face me, and what I saw made me stumble, backward in horror. It wasn't Maria. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and glowing faintly in the dark. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin filled with jagged teeth, the same teeth as the creatures that had chased me earlier. She let out a screech, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the chamber, and lunged toward me. I ran again. The tunnel ahead was narrow and uneven, forcing me to crouch as I moved through it. My flashlight bounced wildly in my hand as I sprinted forward, casting erratic shadows on the walls around me. Behind me, I could hear her screeches echoing through, the tunnel louder and more frantic with each passing second. Don't look back, I told myself through gritted teeth. Just keep moving. But no matter how fast I ran, her voice followed me, calling my name over and over again. Eleanor. I reached another chamber, a smaller one this time, and skidded to a stop. My heart sank as I realized there were more tunnels branching off from here, and I had no idea which one would lead me back to safety. Her screeches echoed behind me, growing louder by the second. I didn't have time to think. I just picked a tunnel at random and ran. This one was even narrower than before, forcing me to crawl on all fours as I moved through it. The walls pressed in on either side of me, making it hard to breathe. My flashlight flickered again, once, twice, then went out completely. No, I whispered desperately as I smacked it against my palm. Not now! The darkness closed in around me like a living thing, thick and suffocating. I fumbled for another rock on the ground with shaking hands, but dropped it in my panic. That's when I heard it, the sound of claws scraping against rock just behind me. I grabbed a rock from the ground and swung blindly behind me. It connected with something solid, and there was a sharp screech of pain followed by a loud thud as she fell back. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, I scrambled forward on all fours until I felt open space ahead of me. My hands found another chamber, this one smaller but with higher ceilings, and pulled myself inside just as she let out another ear-piercing wail behind me. I pressed myself against the far wall of the chamber, clutching Maria's rosary tighter than ever. I pressed myself against the cold stone wall, breathing heavily. My hands were trembling and my heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I clutched Maria's rosary so tightly that the beads dug into my palm. It was the only thing grounding me, the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. The screeches had stopped, but I knew she, or it, was still out there. The silence wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. Every second felt like an eternity as I strained my ears for any sound, any sign of movement. Then I heard it, soft footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Slow and deliberate. I gripped the climbing axe in my other hand, holding it close to my chest. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. My flashlight was useless now, its batteries drained completely. The backup light was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos of my escape. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could feel the vibrations in the ground beneath me. Eleanor, The voice came again, softer this time, but still unmistakably Maria's. Closed my eyes tightly, tears streaming down my face. "You're not real," I whispered to myself. "You're not real." But part of me couldn't let go of the possibility. The tiny sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, it was her. What if she wasn't dead? What if she'd been trapped down here all this time? The footsteps stopped just outside the chamber. My breathing slowed as I waited for whatever was coming next. The figure stepped into the faint light of the chamber, a shadowy silhouette against the darkness of the tunnel behind it. It moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if it didn't want to scare me. "Eleanor." The voice was softer now, almost pleading. I tightened my grip on the axe and took a step back. "Stay away," I said firmly, though my voice trembled with fear. The figure stopped and tilted its head to one side, just like Maria used to do when she was confused or curious. "Don't you recognize me?" it asked. I shook my head violently, tears blurring my vision. "You're not her," I said through gritted teeth. "You're not Maria." The figure stepped closer, and I raised the axe defensively. "Stay back," I shouted. It paused again, its glowing eyes fixed on me. Then it smiled, a slow, eerie grin that stretched across its pale face like a crack in porcelain. "You don't believe me," it said softly. "Look closer." It reached into its pocket and pulled out something, small and shiny, a locket. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it immediately. It was Maria's locket, the one she always wore around her neck. "How?" I stammered, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure took another step forward and held out the locket toward me. "Take it," it said gently. I hesitated for a moment before reaching out slowly to grab the locket from its hand. As soon as my fingers touched it, a wave of memories flooded through me. Images of Maria laughing, crying, singing, moments we'd shared together growing up. For a brief moment, I felt a spark of hope, a flicker of belief that maybe this was her after all. But then something changed. The memories turned dark, twisted and distorted like a nightmare playing, out in fast motion. Images of Maria screaming in pain flashed before my eyes, her face contorted in terror as shadowy figures surrounded her. The whispers returned louder than ever, filling my head with voices that weren't hers, voices that sounded angry and desperate. I dropped the locket and stumbled backward, clutching my head as the voices grew louder and more chaotic. "Stop," I screamed. "Get out of my head." The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You can't escape," it said softly. "She's part of this now, just like you." I opened my eyes and saw the figure transforming, its pale skin darkening and cracking like old stone, its glowing eyes fading into empty sockets, its grin stretching wider until its entire face looked like a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth. It wasn't Maria anymore. It never had been. The creature lunged toward me with terrifying speed, its claws reaching for my throat. I swung the axe wildly and felt it connect with something solid. A sickening crunch echoed through the chamber as the creature let out a screech of pain. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran as fast as I could toward one of the tunnels leading out of the chamber. The walls seemed to close in around me as I sprinted through the narrow passageway, scraping against jagged rocks and stumbling over uneven ground. My lungs burned with every breath. My legs felt like they were about to give out completely, but I couldn't stop. Not now. The tunnel opened up into another chamber, a smaller one this time with a single pool of water in the center. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting every detail of the cave ceiling above like a mirror. I stopped at the edge of the pool and stared into it for a moment before realizing something horrifying. The reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was Maria's. Her face stared back at me from the surface of the water, pale and gaunt with sunken eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. "Eleanor." Her voice echoed softly through the chamber again, pleading this time instead of angry or desperate, Help me. I shook my head violently and stepped back from the pool. No, I whispered under my breath. You're not real. But, deep down, part of me wanted to believe she was real. That somehow she was still here with me in this awful place. Before I could decide what to do next, another sound filled the chamber. A low rumble that shook the ground beneath me like thunder underground. The walls began to tremble. Loose rocks fell from above. Cracks spread across every surface like veins in stone. This wasn't just an earthquake, it was something worse. Something alive. The ground beneath me shook violently, and the walls of the chamber groaned as if the cave itself was alive. Dust and loose rocks rained down from above, and I knew I didn't have much time. Whatever was happening, this place was collapsing, and if I didn't get out now, I'd be buried here forever. I turned and ran, my legs screaming in protest with every step. The tunnel ahead was narrow and uneven, but I didn't care anymore. My only thought was to get as far away from that chamber, and the thing pretending to be Maria, as possible. Behind me, I could hear the creature's screeches echoing through the tunnels, growing fainter with each passing second. It wasn't following me anymore. Maybe it couldn't. Maybe it didn't need to. The whispers had stopped too, replaced by the deafening sound of rocks crashing and tunnels caving in. The air grew thicker with dust, making it harder to breathe. My flashlight flickered weakly, in my hand, but it was enough to guide me forward. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light ahead. The exit. I stumbled out of the cave and into the open air, collapsing onto the ground as sunlight washed over me. For a moment I just lay there, gasping for breath and staring up at the sky. It felt unreal, like I'd been trapped in that darkness for days instead of hours. Mark's voice crackled through my radio, startling me. "Eleanor, are you there? We've been trying to reach you for hours." I grabbed the radio with shaking hands and pressed the button. "I'm here," I said weakly. My voice sounded foreign to me, hoarse and trembling. "Thank God," Mark said. "Are you okay? What happened down there?" I didn't know how to answer him. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd heard? He wouldn't believe me. No, one would. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just got a little lost." Mark didn't press further, but his tone was cautious. "We'll send someone to pick you up. Stay where you are." Days passed after that, but I couldn't shake what had happened in Sector 13. The scratches on the walls, the bones in the chamber, the creature that wore Maria's face. It all haunted me. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. But deep down, I knew better. I still had Maria's rosary in my pocket, the beads smooth and warm from where I'd held them so tightly. It should have brought me comfort, but now it felt like a reminder of something I couldn't explain or escape. A week later, I went back to Sector 13, not because I wanted to, but because I had to know if it was still there. If she was still there. The entrance had collapsed completely. During a week later, I went back to Sector 13, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything else. The memories of what happened in that cave haunted me every waking moment. The whispers, the scratches, the creature that wore Maria's face. It all felt too real to ignore. When I arrived at the entrance, my heart sank. The tunnel had completely collapsed during the tremors. Massive boulders blocked the way in, and there was no sign of the path I'd taken to escape. It was as if the cave had sealed itself off, burying its secrets forever. I stood there for a long time, staring at the rubble. Part of me felt relieved. It meant I didn't have to go back in. But another part of me felt empty, like I'd left something behind in that darkness. Or maybe it was still calling to me. Back at the ranger station, Mark tried to get me to talk about what happened. "Eleanor," he said gently, "you've been quiet since you got out. Are you sure you're okay?" I nodded, forcing a weak smile. "I'm fine," I lied. But Mark wasn't convinced. "You don't look fine," he said. Whatever happened down there, it's eating you up. I wanted to tell him everything, to unload the weight of what I'd seen and heard, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. How could I explain something so impossible? He would think I was crazy. Instead, I just said, "It's nothing. Just a bad trip into the caves." Mark gave me a long, searching look before finally nodding. "If you ever want to talk about it, I'm here." "Thanks," I said quietly, though I knew I never would. The days turned into weeks, and life went back to normal, or at least it should have. But no matter how hard I tried to move on, Sector 13 stayed with me. At night, when everything was quiet and still, I swore I could hear the whispers again. Soft and faint, but unmistakable. Eleanor. I would wake up drenched in sweat, clutching Maria's rosary like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. One night, as I sat alone in my small cabin near the park, I pulled out Maria's locket, the one the creature had shown me in the cave. It was real. There was no denying that. The engraving on the back was exactly as I remembered. To Maria, love always. But how did it get there? How did it have something so personal? The questions gnawed at me endlessly. A few months later, something strange happened. Group of spelunkers, experienced ones, went missing while exploring a different part of Mammoth Cave. Their last known location was near Sector 13. When search teams went looking for them, they found nothing. No gear, no bodies, not even footprints leading back out of the cave system. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced with possibilities. Had they stumbled into whatever I'd encountered? Had they heard the whispers too? I wanted to warn people, to tell them not to go near Sector 13. But what could I say? That monsters lived in the caves? That my dead sister's voice had called out to me from the darkness? No one would believe me. One day, without telling anyone, I packed my gear and returned to Mammoth Cave for one final trip. This time there was no seismic activity drawing me in, just an overwhelming need for answers. The entrance to Sector 13 was still blocked by rubble when I arrived, but that didn't stop me. Using every ounce of strength and determination I had left, I began clearing a path through the rocks. It took hours, maybe even days, but eventually, I broke through. The air inside was colder than before, stale and heavy with an unexplainable weight. As soon as I stepped inside, the whispers returned. Eleanor. This time, though, they didn't sound like Maria. They sounded like me. That was the last time anyone saw me. When Mark came looking for me days later and found my abandoned cabin with my gear missing, he knew where I'd gone, but he never found any trace of me or what happened inside Sector 13. All they found was Maria's rosary lying at the cave entrance and faint scratches on the rocks leading deeper into the darkness. My name is Victor Lawson, and I've been a park ranger for over 15 years. Most people think it's a peaceful job, walking trails, helping lost hikers, keeping an eye on wildlife. But the truth is, it can be anything but peaceful, especially when your patrol area includes the Blackwater Swamp. Blackwater isn't like other swamps. It's alive in ways that don't make sense. The locals say it's cursed, and honestly, I've seen enough to believe them. The swamp stretches for miles with twisted trees that look like they're reaching out to grab you. The water is black as ink, and the air always smells damp and rotten like something's decaying just out of sight. It was a quiet night when this all started. Too quiet. Normally, you'd hear frogs croaking or the occasional splash of an alligator slipping into the water, but not tonight. Tonight, the swamp was dead silent. I was out on my usual patrol, riding my small motorboat through the narrow channels of the swamp. The spotlight on my boat cut through the darkness, bouncing off the gnarled branches and casting strange shadows on the water. Usually, I'd see the glowing eyes of alligators reflecting back at me, but tonight, nothing. No eyes, no movement, just still water and silence. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just one of those nights where everything felt off for no reason. But as I moved deeper into the swamp, I couldn't ignore how wrong everything felt. The trees looked more twisted than usual, their roots clawing into the water like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy, thick enough to choke on, and every breath felt like I was inhaling something rotten. I stopped the boat near a clearing where I usually checked for signs of poachers or illegal traps. As I turned off the engine, I noticed something strange. The water wasn't rippling like it normally would after stopping a boat. It was perfectly still, like glass. Even my spotlight didn't seem to penetrate it fully. Instead, it reflected back at me in a way that made my stomach turn. Stood there for a moment listening for anything that might explain why everything felt so wrong. But there was nothing. No frogs croaking, no insects buzzing, not even the sound of wind rustling through the trees. Just silence. And then I smelled it. A sharp, sour stench that made me gag. It wasn't like anything I'd smelled before. It was worse than rotting fish or swamp gas. It was so strong that it burned my nose and made my eyes water. I turned my spotlight toward the shore to see if there was some dead animal nearby causing the smell. But what I saw made my blood run. The vegetation along the bank looked wrong. The plants were wilted and blackened as if they'd been burned or poisoned. Even stranger were the patterns in the mud, circles and lines that looked almost deliberate, like someone, or something, had carved them there. I leaned forward to get a closer look when I heard it, a faint sound coming from deeper in the swamp. At first I thought it might be an animal call, or maybe just some trick of the wind echoing through the trees. But as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't either of those things. It sounded like whispering. The whispers were soft at first, almost too quiet to hear over my own breathing. But they grew louder as if they were moving closer to me. Or maybe I was moving closer to them without realizing it. I gripped my flashlight tighter and scanned the area around me again. But there was nothing there, just shadows and twisted branches reaching out over the water. "Hello?" I called out instinctively, even though I knew better than to expect an answer in a place like this. The whispers stopped. For a moment, everything went back to being silent again. But this time, it didn't feel peaceful or empty. It felt heavy and suffocating, as if something was waiting just out of sight. I shook my head and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. It wouldn't be the first time this swamp had gotten under my skin like that. But as I started up my boat's engine again and began moving further into Blackwater Swamp, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me from just beyond the reach of my spotlight. I've always been good at staying calm, even when things get strange. I guess that's one of the reasons I became a park ranger in the first place. You see, I'm no stranger to danger. Before this job, I served in Vietnam. That was a long time ago, but some things stick with you, like how to keep your head when everything around you feels wrong. After the war, I came back home to Louisiana, hoping for a fresh start. But life didn't exactly go as planned. My marriage fell apart, and I found myself alone, looking for something that made sense. That's when I took this job. Being out here in nature helped me feel grounded again, or at least it used to. Blackwater Swamp was my assigned area, and over the years I've learned every inch of it. I know where the gators like to hide, which trails are safe, and which ones will swallow you whole if you're not careful. But no matter how much time I spend here, this place never feels fully right. The locals have their stories about Blackwater. They say it's cursed, haunted by spirits or creatures that don't belong in this world. Most people laugh it off, but there's one person who doesn't. Eulalie Baptiste. Eulalie is an old Cajun woman who lives on the edge of the swamp in a little shack made of weathered wood and tin. She's lived here her whole life and knows things about this place that no one else does, or at least she claims to. People call her a healer or a witch, depending on who you ask. I've talked to Eulalie a few times over the years. She's always been kind to me, but also strange. She speaks in riddles and says things that stick with you long after you've left her shack. The last time I saw her was about a week ago when I stopped by to check on her after a bad storm rolled through the area. She invited me inside for tea. Her version of tea is more like swamp water with herbs floating in it, and we talked for a while about nothing in particular. Then out of nowhere she looked at me with those sharp eyes of hers and said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Victor," she said, her voice low and serious, "you need to be careful out there in Blackwater. There are things in that swamp that walk between water and air, things that don't belong." I laughed nervously and told her I'd be fine. I've been patrolling this swamp for years without any trouble. But she didn't smile or laugh back. "They're watching," she said simply, "and they don't like strangers." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and thanked her for the tea before heading back to my boat. Her words stuck with me, though, especially now as I sat alone in the middle of the swamp with nothing but silence around me. I tried to push Eulali's warning out of my mind as I continued my patrol, but it wasn't easy. The swamp felt different tonight, heavier somehow, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The spotlight on my boat flickered for a moment before going steady again, and I frowned as I checked the battery connection. It seemed fine, but the flicker still bothered me. "Probably just old equipment," I muttered under my breath. But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true, or if Eulali's warning was starting to make too much sense. I kept the boat moving slowly, the motor humming just loud enough to break the silence. The spotlight swept across the water, lighting up the twisted roots and branches that jutted out like claws. I told myself everything was fine, but my gut said otherwise. The swamp had a way of playing tricks on you, especially at night. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, sounds came from nowhere, and sometimes you'd swear you saw something just out of the corner of your eye. But tonight felt different. It wasn't just tricks. It was like the swamp itself was alive. As I rounded a bend in the channel, I caught a whiff of that same sour stench from earlier. It hit me like a punch to the face, making my stomach churn. I slowed the boat and scanned the area with my flashlight. That's when I saw it. Floating, near the edge of the water, was an alligator, or what was left of one. Its body was bloated and torn open with chunks of flesh missing as if something had been feeding on it. The sight made my skin crawl. I'd seen dead gators before, but not like this. This wasn't natural. I leaned over the side of the boat to get a closer look, careful not to get too close to the edge. The gator's eyes were wide open, staring blankly at nothing, and its jaws hung slack as if it had died mid-scream. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong here. I couldn't explain it, but looking at that gator made me feel sick, not just in my stomach, but deep down in my bones. I straightened up and wiped my hands on my pants, trying to shake off the unease creeping over me. "Just another dead animal," I muttered to myself, though I didn't believe it for a second. I pushed the throttle forward and kept moving, but now my heart was pounding harder than before. The sour smell lingered in the air, growing stronger with every passing minute. It clung to me like a wet blanket, making it hard to breathe. That's when I noticed something else. Ripples in the water behind me. At first, I thought it might be a fish or maybe another gator swimming nearby. But these ripples were different. They moved against the current, following my boat at a steady pace. I killed the engine and let the boat drift for a moment, listening carefully. The ripples stopped, too, like whatever was causing them didn't want to be noticed. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the water where I'd seen the ripples, but there was nothing there. Just dark water stretching out into darkness. Then, I heard it again, the whispering. It was faint at first, barely louder than a breath of wind rustling through leaves. But as I strained to listen, it grew louder, closer. It wasn't just one voice. It was many voices all speaking at once, overlapping each other in a way that made my skin crawl. I couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded like gibberish or some language I didn't understand. My hands tightened around the flashlight as I swung it toward the trees lining the bank. But again, there was nothing there. The whispers stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything went silent again. No whispers, no ripples, just me and my boat floating in still water. And then, splash. The sound came from behind me. A loud splash like something heavy had hit the water hard. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my flashlight into the swamp. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest as I scanned the area behind me. The water rippled wildly now as if something big had just gone under. But whatever it was, it stayed hidden beneath the surface. I fumbled for my radio and pressed down on the button with shaking fingers. "This is Ranger Lawson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though fear was clawing at me from all sides. "I'm out, on Blackwater Swamp near Marker 12. Something's not right out here." Static crackled back at me, no response. "Dispatch? Can you hear me?" I tried again. More static. Great. Either my radio was busted or something was interfering with the signal. Neither option made me feel any better about being out here alone. I started up the engine again and turned back toward where I'd come from. I wasn't about to stick around any longer than necessary, but as soon as I started moving, the ripples returned, this time faster and closer than before. The ripples were getting closer. My hands gripped the steering wheel of the boat so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what was following me, but I could feel something was out there just beneath the surface of the water. The spotlight on my boat flickered again, and this time it went out completely. The swamp was plunged into darkness, with only the faint glow of the moon filtering through the twisted trees above. I fumbled with the light switch trying to get it back on, but it wouldn't budge. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, my voice shaking. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't a growl, exactly, but more like a deep rumble, almost like the sound of rocks grinding together underwater. I froze, listening. The sound came again, this time closer. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the water behind me. At first I didn't see anything, just dark ripples spreading out across the surface. But then something broke through the water, a shape, just for a split second before it disappeared again. It was big, bigger than any gator I'd ever seen. My heart was pounding now, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. I started up the engine again and pushed the throttle forward, steering the boat toward a small island up ahead. It wasn't much, just a patch of dry land surrounded by trees, but it was better than staying in open water with whatever that thing was. The boat lurched forward, cutting through the still water as fast as it could go. The ripples behind me grew wilder, and I could hear splashing now. Something was chasing me. I reached the island and jumped out of the boat as soon as it hit the shore, pulling it up onto the muddy bank to keep it from drifting away. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the area around me. The island was small and overgrown with thick vegetation, but at least it gave me some cover. The splashing stopped. For a moment, everything went quiet again. Too quiet. I stood there on the shore, breathing hard and trying to listen for any sign of movement. The air felt heavy and still, like the swamp itself was holding its breath. And then I saw it. It rose slowly out of the water just a few feet from where my boat had been moments ago. At first I thought it might be another gator, but as more of it emerged, I realized this thing was no gator. It stood upright on two legs, its body covered in slimy black scales that glistened in the moonlight. Its arms were long and thin, ending in clawed hands that looked sharp enough to tear through steel. Its head was wrong, elongated like a fish's, but with jagged teeth that jutted out at odd angles. And its eyes were glowing yellow, staring right at me with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. I stumbled back a step, nearly tripping over a root behind me. The creature tilted its head slightly as if studying me, and then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't a growl or a roar. It was a voice. My voice. "Hello?" It said, mimicking the word I'd called out earlier in a tone that was almost human but not quite right. I froze in place, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing and hearing. How could it know my voice? How could it speak at all? The creature took a step toward me, its claws sinking into the muddy ground with a wet squelch. I backed away further until my back hit one of the twisted trees behind me. "Stay back," I shouted, raising my flashlight like a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't do much good. The creature stopped for a moment, as if considering my words, and then it smiled. At least I think it smiled. It bared its jagged teeth in what might have been an attempt at a grin but looked more like a predator baring its fangs before striking. Before I could react, another sound came from behind me, a splash followed by more movement in the water. Turned just in time to see another one of them climbing onto the shore. This one smaller but just as horrifying as the first. Panic surged through me as I realized there wasn't just one of these things. There were more. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran deeper into the island's vegetation, crashing through bushes and tree roots as fast as my legs would carry me. Behind me, I could hear them following, their footsteps heavy and deliberate like they knew exactly where I was going. My mind raced as I tried to think of a plan, anything that would give me even a slim chance of surviving this nightmare. But all I could think about were Eulalie's words echoing in my head. They're watching, and they don't like strangers. I crashed through the thick underbrush, my flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand as I ran. The sound of snapping branches and squelching mud filled my ears, but I could still hear them behind me. Their heavy footsteps, the wet slapping of their scaled limbs against the ground. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They were hurting me, driving me deeper into the island where escape would be impossible. I stumbled over a root and fell hard onto the muddy ground. My flashlight slipped from my grip and rolled a few feet away, its beam shining uselessly into the trees. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled to my knees, grabbing at the flashlight with shaking hands. "Think, Victor," I muttered. To myself, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've been in worse situations than this. But had I? In Vietnam, I'd faced enemies I could understand, human enemies with motives and weaknesses. This was something else entirely. These creatures didn't belong here, they didn't belong anywhere. I forced myself to focus. I couldn't let fear take over, not if I wanted to survive. My training kicked in, and I started scanning the area, for anything I could use as a weapon or a trap. The island was small and overgrown with thick vegetation, but there were plenty of fallen branches and sharp roots sticking out of the ground. The creatures were getting closer now. I could hear their guttural rumbling and the wet squelch of their claws sinking into the mud. My flashlight flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the trees. I grabbed a sturdy branch from the ground and broke off the smaller twigs, leaving a jagged point at one end. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The first creature appeared through the trees, its glowing yellow eyes locking onto me like a predator sizing up its prey. It moved slowly, deliberately, its claws flexing as it stepped closer. "Stay back," I shouted, holding the makeshift spear in front of me like a barrier. The creature tilted its head again, that same unsettling smile spreading across its face. It didn't stop. I lunged forward with the spear aiming for its chest. The jagged point sank into its scaly skin with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out a shriek that made my ears ring. It stumbled back for a moment, clawing at the branch embedded in its chest, but then it did something that made my stomach drop. It pulled the branch out as if it were nothing more than a splinter and tossed it aside. I backed away quickly, my mind racing for another plan. The second creature appeared behind the first now, its smaller frame moving faster and more aggressively. They were closing in on me from both sides. My eyes darted to my boat on the shore, my only chance of escape, but it was too far away. If I ran for it now, they'd catch me before I even made it halfway. I scanned the area around me again, looking for anything that could give me an advantage. That's when I saw it, a tangled mass of roots hanging overhead from one of the twisted trees near the shore. The roots were thick and heavy enough that if I could cut them loose, they might fall on top of the creatures and buy me some time. Didn't have much to work with, just my flashlight and a pocket knife I always carried on patrol, but it was worth a shot. I bolted toward the tree as fast as I could, ignoring the sharp pain in my legs from running through uneven terrain. The creatures roared behind me now, their guttural voices echoing through the swamp like thunder. Reaching the tree, I climbed up onto one of its low-hanging branches and started sawing at the tangled roots with my knife. The wood was tough and damp, making every cut feel like it took an eternity. The first creature reached the base of the tree just as I made progress on one of the thicker roots. It clawed at the trunk, trying to pull itself up toward me. "Come on!" I shouted at myself through gritted teeth as I worked faster. The second creature joined in now, circling below like a shark waiting for its prey to fall into reach. Finally, with one last desperate cut, the root gave way, and the tangled mass fell with a loud crash onto both creatures below. For a moment, everything went still. The creatures were pinned under the weight of the roots, their guttural growls muffled by mud and wood. I didn't wait to see if they would free themselves. I jumped down from the tree and sprinted toward my boat with everything I had left in me. The mud sucked at my boots as I ran, but adrenaline pushed me forward faster than I thought possible. Reaching the boat, I shoved it off the shore and jumped inside just as one of the creatures broke free from under the roots. It roared loudly this time, a sound so deep and guttural that it shook me to my core, but it didn't follow me into the water. I started up the engine and sped away from the island as fast as my boat would go. The spotlight flickered back on now, lighting up patches of water ahead of me. But all I could think about was getting out of Blackwater Swamp alive. As I glanced back over my shoulder one last time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Again, the face of one of those creatures breaking through the surface of the water for just a moment before disappearing again. Its face looked almost human now, almost like mine. I don't remember much about how I got back to the ranger station. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely steer the boat, and my mind was racing with everything I'd just seen. The swamp stretched out behind me, dark and silent again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. When I reached the dock, I stumbled out of the boat and collapsed onto the wooden planks, gasping for air. My body felt heavy, like I'd been carrying a weight far too big for me to bear. I couldn't stop thinking about those creatures, the way they moved, the way they watched me, and that final moment when one of them surfaced with a face that looked almost human, almost like mine. I tried to report what had happened, but my radio was still dead and my phone had no signal. By the time I made it back to the station, dawn was breaking over the swamp, casting long shadows across the water. Everything looked normal again, peaceful even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me from the trees. I wrote everything down in my logbook, every detail I could remember, but when I went to check it later, the pages were blank. The ink had smeared as if it had been soaked in water. A week later, my boat was found drifting near Marker 12 with no sign of me on board. My logbook was recovered too, but it was empty, just like the swamp that morning. The locals say you can still hear my whistle on nights when the moon is full, echoing through Blackwater Swamp like a ghost calling out for help. And every now and then, researchers find strange markings in the mud, circles and lines carved by something that doesn't belong. Ulali Baptiste still warns anyone who'll listen. The swamp doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive.